Hello, thanks for joining us. You're watching Middle East Now on I24 News. I'm Laura Sellier, and these are the headlines. Evacuation orders, dozens of Hamas fighters killed and a tunnel destroyed as the IDF returns to operations in southern Gaza. The UAE sentences 3 people to death over the murder of Israeli-Moldovan Rabbi Tzvi Kogan last November. And a day after Syria's Kurds rejected the new government in Damascus, some signs of cooperation over oil resources. First, the IDF has issued fresh evacuation orders in southern Gaza and says it will soon begin intense operations there. Israel is awaiting a response from Hamas to its counter-offer of a ceasefire and hostage release deal. Hamas reportedly agreed to an Egyptian proposal to free 5 hostages in exchange for a 50-day ceasefire. Let's go down to the border with Gaza. Our correspondent Joe Brown is there for us now. And Joe, we have got some signs, haven't we, that those intense operations, as the IDF put it, have already begun.
Yes, so interestingly, for the large part of this afternoon, I was stood on an Israeli kibbutz that was overlooking the southern part of the Gaza Strip. This is Khan Yunis and Rafah, in the anticipation that we would be seeing something. Whenever we receive these evacuation orders, they're usually followed with intense strikes. However, today we did not see anything, we did not hear anything, and we did not feel anything. But then we came up to here where we are right now, overlooking the northern part of the Gaza Strip. This is Beit Hanun, just over my shoulder. And as soon as we came here, we saw the smoke rising, we heard the booms, we felt the ground shake, and that's not to say that nothing has been going on in the southern part of the Gaza Strip, but at the moment, at least on face value, the northern part of the Gaza Strip is where the IDF is currently having its hub of operations. But of course, earlier today they did announce an evacuation order for a large part of the southern part of the Gaza Strip. This is by far the largest evacuation notice since the resumption of fighting earlier this month, and it's one of the largest evacuation notices since October the 7th. This is anywhere south of Khan Yunis, especially the area of Rafah, which is a major strategic point for the IDF. This was the last territory in Gaza that they went into. They only went into this in May 2024. This is an area that is known for being a major part in the weaponry smuggling from Egypt, as it's just over the border from there, but it's also a hub for Hamas terrorists. When the IDF went in there in May, they found the bodies of multiple hostages, and this was where the 6 hostages who were supposedly guarding Yahya Sinwar, including Hersh Goldberg-Polin, were. This was in Rafah, and even within the last couple of days, the IDF has been fighting terrorists around this area. The Palestinian Red Crescent said that 8 of their workers had been killed by Israeli fire. The IDF responded to that, saying that they were approached by a quote-unquote suspicious vehicle. This is likely because they did not have their headlights on, and this is in an area where they had already been fighting terrorists previously, so it's likely a case of mistaken identity. The IDF are still going to investigate that. But right now, with this evacuation notice coming on Eid al-Fitr, the last day of Ramadan, a day of celebrations, we've been seeing on social media videos of thousands of people fleeing from the southern area of Rafah in towards the more central coastal areas of Al-Mawasi, where there have been tents for the last 18 months for the people who have been fleeing their homes. And whilst we did not see anything from the air, this is likely going to be the start of a major operation, likely going to be a ground operation in the southern part of the Gaza Strip.
Joe, thank you very much. Joe Brown there reporting from the border with Gaza. Well, here with me in the studio this hour, Gidi Greenstein is a former peace negotiator under the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. He's also the author of Insight, Peacemaking in the Oslo Process, 30 years and counting. Welcome to the studio, Gidi.
Thank you very much for having me.
Our security analyst, Yaakov Laffin, is here with us as well. And Yaakov, I want to start with you briefly because that's a huge area to evacuate in southern Gaza. What is exactly happening on the ground?
Yeah, I think it's very much like Joe said, this is a signal that the ground offensive is going to expand into Rafah. And we're already seeing the ground offensive beginning to expand in central and northern Gaza as well. Just a few hours ago, the IDF announced that its Division 252 destroyed a kilometer-long tunnel in northern Gaza. So we are seeing IDF ground activity across the Gaza Strip, and it seems to be gradually expanding because the government, the security cabinet, wants to give basically opportunities for Hamas to come back and give better offers for an interim hostage deal. But if that fails to materialize, then we are seeing the continued and phased expansion of both ground and air operations. And on top of all that, let's remember that the IDF or the Israeli government have basically stopped all aid from coming into the Gaza Strip for a long time now. We're talking, I think...
3 weeks, right?
Yeah, several weeks, 3 weeks. And that is real pressure on Hamas's political regime. And on top of that, we've seen a host of eliminations of both senior military wing terrorists and political regime figures of Hamas. So they're under very, very real pressure. All
right, Yaakov, thank you. Gidi, I turn to you. The government says, as did President Herzog yesterday, that this renewed fighting is about putting more pressure on Hamas and getting them back to the negotiating table to get those 59 people home. Do you agree with that strategy?
Well, I actually think that we need to look at the options that are being presented to Hamas. Israel's 3 fundamental demands are to have Hamas leadership leave, return of the hostages, demilitarization of Gaza. And then what? Is Gaza going to be controlled by Palestinians? Is it going to be controlled by Israel? What's going to happen with the population? There is no vision that is presented publicly for the day after. And therefore, the system of incentives that are created around Hamas leadership is, I believe, very weak. I mean, they're better off staying in Gaza than leaving because there is no win that is being offered to them in exchange for that kind of concession.
To the Gazan civilians or to Hamas?
To Hamas leadership, which is, would cause them to leave. Basically, the government of Israel is not saying, even if Hamas accepts all of Israel's demands, what happens to Gaza next?
But they're in a bind right now, aren't they? Because there can be no reconstruction in Gaza. There can be none of this money pouring in to rebuild the Strip unless they surrender.
Everybody understands that there is no rebuilding of Gaza, no reconstruction as long as Hamas
there. But Israel can exist like this for an unlimited period. There's no international pressure right now. The Trump White House doesn't care. I mean, Hamas is on the back foot more, would you say?
Israel is at the risk of dramatic and historic overstretched situation. If you look at the demographics in the area under Israel's control, there are 7 million Jews, 2 million non-Jews under the sovereignty of the State of Israel, and then about 5 million Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. We're heading in the direction of collapse of the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and eventually kind of canceling of the Oslo Accords. This is the agenda of the government explicitly, and Minister of Defense spoke clearly about annexation this week, advancing annexation. And then we're being drawn into a reinstitution of the civil administration in Gaza. Just think about the military moving into southern Gaza as was described. Under the current political structure in Israel, once we move in this time, we cannot move out. The international organizations are on the verge of pulling out of Gaza, which means that the humanitarian responsibility is going to fall in the lap of Israel. The whole vision of Palestinians en masse leaving Gaza at the moment is unrealistic. So we're actually looking at a massive overstretch of Israel. And that kind of overstretch is not a sign of strength.
A long-term occupation of the Gaza Strip.
Control of the, and in the West Bank. And we're also moving in this direction in the West Bank. Those two things could happen very quickly. We're in a very unstable system, and once it happens, Israel is in a dramatic split in terms of its national security.
What would you do differently at this point?
Well, we've spoken about it many times in this, in this studio. There is only one way to kind of finish the war in a way that addresses Israel's fundamental demands, and that is to divide Gaza into areas A and B. Area A is area B is the perimeter, Israeli security control. Area A is effectively declared as, under Palestinian regime that allows them to invite in Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries like the UAE to establish their control and effectively begin the transition. And that's also a context within which there could be a conversation with Hamas leadership of leaving, which they have given some indications that they're willing to consider. So that's sort of the only possible outcome from the war that is not Israeli civil administration control of Gaza.
All right, Gidi, thanks. Yaakov, could you respond to that?
Yeah, I think, this is a long-term conversation, but if we want to talk about what's happening right now, we have thousands of Hamas terrorists at large throughout the Gaza Strip. No international force is able, willing, motivated to take them on. It's only the IDF that can do that. And so if we're talking about a post-Hamas future, the only way that can happen is by passing through the completion of the military operation against the Gaza Strip. Otherwise, Hamas remains. There's no way to sugarcoat it. It will remain politically, it will remain militarily. So I think that's where we're at. And the hostage situation is, of course, a major complicating factor. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about a long-term vision, either Hamas is there or it's not. It's quite binary. And if we leave it there, it's going to bounce right back.
And I just want to comment on that. Look at the January 18th situation. Israel did not develop an alternative for Hamas. On January 18th, we were pushed to a deal, no alternative to Hamas. And therefore, Hamas grew back again and expanded even into the areas where Israel had fairly established security control in northern Gaza. We handed over northern Gaza to Hamas because we had no alternative. And that may happen again.
All right, thank you both of you. Stay with me. Well, freed hostage Yarden Bibas, whose wife Shiri and 2 young children were murdered in captivity, has given his first English language interview. Bibas said Hamas terrorists had told him not to worry because he would find a better wife and have more children. Ex-hostage Keith Siegel, meanwhile, told how he was forced to watch footage of female hostages being sexually assaulted. More in this report, which some viewers may find disturbing.
Disturbing new testimonies are emerging from Israeli hostages released from Gaza. In his first interview since being freed on February 1st, Yarden Bibas spoke to CBS's 60 Minutes. While in captivity, Hamas forced him to appear on camera after telling him that his wife Shiri and their 2 children, 4-year-old Ariel and 9-month-old Kfir, had been killed in an Israeli airstrike. But Yarden insists he knows the truth. His family was murdered by terrorists. His Hamas captors told him it was fine.
They were murdered in cold blood, bare hands. They used to tell me, doesn't matter, you get a new wife, get a new kids, better wife, better kids.
They said that to you?
Yeah, many times. Many times.
Yarden believes the renewed Israeli military operations in Gaza will not pressure Hamas into releasing the remaining hostages. He chose an American outlet for his first interview because he believes U.S. President Donald Trump can help secure the freedom of more Israelis.
I know he can help. I'm here because of Trump. I'm here only because of him.
Meanwhile, another recently released hostage, American-Israeli Keith Siegel, shared his own trauma, revealing that he was forced to watch the sexual assault of female hostages by terrorists.
I witnessed a young woman who was being tortured by the terrorists. I mean, literal, torture, not just in a figurative sense.
They made you watch it?
Yeah. I saw sexual assault with female hostages.
Keith said his spirit was completely broken. Another freed hostage, Tal Shoham, recalls the devastating conversations with Guy Gilboa Dalal and Evyatar David, still held in Gaza, who openly spoke about taking their own lives due to the unbearable conditions.
One of the toughest things that I heard from them, they told me more than once that why to stay alive now? I mean, why just to not take their own life with their own hand and to finish it? I mean, to get released from this.
And they will do it together if they decide to do it.
Even after their release, the former hostages continue to fight for those left behind while grappling with their own trauma. They feel a sense of urgency and fear that time is running out. 24 hostages in Gaza are believed to still be alive.
And Giddy Greenstein and Yaakov Lapin still with me in the studio. And Giddy, every time we hear these horrific testimonies from the ex-hostages, we are reminded how urgent it is to bring those people home. Around 23 hostages thought to be still alive. But I want to ask you also about what we've seen in Gaza over the past week. Very rare protests against the Hamas leadership. I mean, do you see some hope that the people perhaps could turn against Hamas?
We've all been waiting for the kind of uprising against Hamas that will eventually push them out. Hamas has a very strong hold on the population because we have to remember Hamas is not just a military organization. Hamas is a social organization with broad grassroots presence through welfare, healthcare, education systems. So they have a wide network of control over the population. Also, they've been the only ones who actually have the capacity to govern in Gaza. Without an alternative, regime to replace Hamas, I think it will be very, very difficult to see Hamas moved out. And also, again, it goes back to our earlier question. Let's say that these processes succeed. Let's say they're able to displace Hamas. And again, then what? Does the government of Israel offer them some sort of a truce? Are we in exchange for the hostages? Will the Gaza borders remain untouched? Are they going to be changed? Are there going to be settlements in northern Gaza?
But I mean, that's always the issue, isn't it? When you're trying to overthrow a brutal regime, and we just saw in Syria, you know, the most urgent thing was to get Assad out of the country before they started thinking about who would run the country.
And what we need to remember, these are complex systems, very, very volatile at this moment, very unintended, a lot of unintended consequences that could happen, and things could happen really, really fast on our side and on the other side. And I think everybody would agree. This is a highly unstable system, and it could spin out of control, pivot out of control one way or another very quickly.
And Israel will be left holding the baby, so to speak. Yaakov, is there anything the IDF or Israel could do to help support these protesters and these dissidents in Gaza?
Yeah, they could defeat Hamas. I think that actually what we're seeing is a sort of gauge, you know, in the Middle East. Power is the currency here that everybody speaks, for better or for worse, often for worse. But what they're responding to, in my opinion, is Hamas's weakness. And not only Hamas, the military wing, the terrorist army, but the political regime, when they see one after the other, people who were designated as prime ministers of Gaza eliminated, when they see that Hamas is unable, or struggling, I should say, to move its personnel around to repress because 100 of its trucks were destroyed in you know, just a couple of hours in airstrikes, that emboldens them to tell Hamas, enough, this is going nowhere, you've lost. And I think they're responding to that, and now we're seeing, you know, things go slightly quiet because Hamas is sort of, you know, playing rear guard and executing in the most brutal and classic Hamas fashion to make examples out of people who dared criticize it. So I think that the more the Gazan population sees that the IDF is winning, the more emboldened they will be. It's a direct response to that. That's, I think, the currency of this region, its power and perceived lack of it as well.
What about what Gidi was saying about the IDF taking areas and then losing control and Hamas retaking them? Is there a change in strategy under the new IDF chief of staff?
Well, we'll have to see. But look, I can tell you that, you know, from a classic military perspective, when you want to defeat an enemy that's embedded, as Gidi was saying, socially as well, right into the population and using them as human shields, you have to take territory, you have to clear it out, and you have to eventually hand it off to an alternative regime or an autonomy, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But we haven't even done the first stage, which is taking the territory and clearing it out. Until now, the Israeli strategy has been to move in and then move back out. So it shouldn't surprise anybody that Hamas moves right back into areas that Israel has vacated.
And I think that Yaakov is actually touching on a fundamental dilemma of Israeli national security. Two dilemmas. Number one, Somalization of Gaza. You keep, you know, mowing the lawn, killing the leadership, not just military leadership in the land strikes, also civilian leadership. So there's nobody organizing the population and the area. So basically there's an implosion of the civil order, which then brings us in. And it's not just about terror and security. It's also about environment issue, healthcare issues, immunization of children. There are a lot of things that could sort of ripple in our direction. The second piece here that we need to remember is that effectively, what the government of Israel has been avoiding the decision, which is, for example, will the territorial integrity of Gaza be preserved? Will there be is Gaza and the West Bank, Palestinians in the West Bank are seen as a single territorial unit, and therefore the political framework that has been created since Camp David 1978 until today, is it still in place? Are we actually envisioning some sort of a different political system, framework? All of these issues have not been discussed until now. We are 18 months into the war or so, and these fundamental political conversations have not been had.
All right. Okay. Thank you both. Well, complicating efforts in the eyes of many to free the hostages are the Prime Minister's legal issues. Already testifying regularly in his corruption trial, Benjamin Netanyahu was today questioned by police in the so-called Qatar Gate affair. Lynn Plachmeyer has the story.
Two top aides to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu were arrested Monday morning as suspects in the so-called Qatar Gate. Jonathan Ulrich and Eli Feldstein are accused of having links to Qatar via an international firm contracted by Doha to feed Israeli journalists pro-Qatari stories. Earlier this month, police questioned both Feldstein and Ulrich on suspicion of contacting a foreign agent, fraud, money laundering and bribery. Netanyahu was questioned by police in the case regarding the alleged unlawful financial ties between his senior staffers and Qatar. But Netanyahu is not treated as a suspect in the case, but rather as someone with knowledge of the affair. The investigation focuses specifically on alleged Qatari payments to Netanyahu's close circle between May 2022 and October 2024. The investigation was under the orders of Shin Bet chief Ronen Bar, who Netanyahu is currently trying to fire. Netanyahu's Likud party has come out with a statement accusing the Attorney General's office and Shin Bet chief Ronen Bar of, quote, conducting futile investigations in the dark under a gag order in an attempt to prevent the dismissal of the Shin Bet chief, using Ulrich and others as cannon fodder. The statement continues saying, their goal is to carry out a coup d'etat through arrest warrants. This is not an investigation. This is not law enforcement. This is an attempted assassination of democracy and an attempt to replace the will of the people with the rule of bureaucrats. Opposition leader Yair Lapid says this statement does not deny that Ulrich and Feldstein received money from Doha. Another political rival, Avigdor Lieberman, accuses Netanyahu of trying to divert public attention away from Qatargate by firing the Shin Bet chief.
And in another confrontation with Israel's legal establishment, the Prime Minister has nominated former Navy Commander Vice Admiral Eli Sharvit as the next head of the Shin Bet National Security Agency. Sharvit's appointment has upset Israelis on both the left and the right. And the courts are still trying to block Netanyahu's decision to fire Ronen Bar in the first place. More in this report.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has selected former Navy Commander Vice Admiral Eli Sharvit to be the next head of Israel's National Security Agency, Shin Bet. Sharvit is set to replace Ronen Bar, who was dismissed by the cabinet earlier this month but remains in his post while the High Court reviews petitions challenging his removal. Netanyahu has said he lost confidence in Bar, but the opposition and Attorney General claim that Bar's ousting is linked to an ongoing Shin Bet investigation into alleged ties between Netanyahu's senior aides and Qatar, which supports Hamas. Netanyahu conducted interviews with 7 candidates before settling on Sharvit, whose candidacy is now subject to review by the vetting committee before being finalized by the cabinet. The Prime Minister's office highlighted that Sharvit served in the IDF for 36 years, including 5 years as commander of the Israel Navy. In that position, he led the force building the maritime defense of the territorial waters and conducted complex operations against Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran. Earlier this month, Sharvit was appointed by IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir to join a panel of former officers tasked with evaluating investigations into the military's response to the October 7th attack. While Sharvit has a distinguished military career, it's reported that he does not speak Arabic and has not been involved in Palestinian affairs. Earlier this year, as CEO of Elgri Eco Energy, he criticized U.S. President Donald Trump's climate policies, saying Trump's short-sightedness sends a shocking message to the world of disregard for scientific reality, the well-being of humanity, and responsibility to future generations. Opposition leaders have expressed cautious optimism about Sharvit's appointment, acknowledging his military leadership, but stressing that he must prove his loyalty to the law and the state, not just to the Prime Minister. Sharvit also reportedly participated in protests against the government's judicial overhaul plans in 2023, further raising concerns about his political views. Now, under pressure from coalition members, Netanyahu is reportedly reconsidering his choice of Sharvit for Shin Bet head.
So a lot to unpack there, Giddy Greenstein, but Netanyahu's fight with the judiciary is pretty much what is making the headlines around the world right now.
So basically, we have to remember that October 7 is what is called a strategic or fundamental surprise. We know, everybody that understands anything about fundamental surprises knows that fundamental surprises incubate in the interface between the military leadership and the political leadership. A fundamental strategic surprise is never about overlooking of not hearing some sort of a secret correspondent on the other side. It incubates over time, and that's why Netanyahu is fighting to the end to prevent a National Inquiry Commission, because he knows that what happened in 1973, where the Inquiry Commission was focused on the military, that will not fly today. Fast forward to Qatar. Qatar's strategy, we had known all along, it's its strength and its problematics in terms of Israel, is that it's focused and it's based on the concept of frenemy. It's a friend and an enemy of all of the countries around it. It's a small nation surrounded by Saudi Arabia on one side, Iran on the other side, and they have to balance. This is their strength in terms from our perspective. And Qatar was treated by the Netanyahu administration, and not just by the Netanyahu administration, as an intimate ally for many, many years. So you could understand why people around Netanyahu may have had the wrong signals in terms of what they can do with Qatar and get away with, which is what is happening today.
All right, thanks, Gideon. I should say that the Prime Minister and his circle deny all of the allegations. The case is still ongoing, Yaakov, but I mean, Qatar isn't officially an enemy state of Israel, is it, bizarrely?
Not officially, but look, first of all, Qatar is an immensely problematic player. And if we zoom out for a second, we can see that its influence and cash, bought influence is absolutely global, from U.S. higher education to the location of the largest American air base in the Middle East. And if you look at the relationship between Qatar and its genuinely moderate Sunni Arab countries, it's not one of friendliness. There was an attempt to put Qatar in its place by Saudi Arabia and its allies, which was unsuccessful. And that's because the leadership of Qatar follows and is absolutely attached to an Islamist pro-Hamas ideology. The new Qatari defense minister, who recently had to, according to memory, delete some social media posts in which he was saying, Jerusalem awaken, the memory of Al-Qassam lives on, and we are all Hamas. So this is what the Qatari authorities have in their heart. And then, they get to play firefighters after being pyromaniacs, and they get away with it globally, not just regionally. Here in Israel, we don't have the privilege. I understand why there is a desire to try and use Qatar's contacts with Hamas to get hostages out. That's a humanitarian issue, and I understand why, but we have to be very, very careful when we're dealing with this country.
Yaakov, thank you very much indeed. Giddy Greenstein, thank you to you as well for coming to the studio. We're going to take a short break. Up next, US President Donald Trump is off to Saudi Arabia for his first foreign trip. What's next?
Dance, music, and magic immerse you in the story of Jerusalem. This is Jerusalem, an unforgettable musical where the past and present meet. Welcome to the heart of the most sought-after city in the world. A unique experience only at Kikar HaMusika. Reserve now at thisisjerusalem.co.il.
Bad posture. The ever-increasing hours we spend sitting, working, and even while trying to relax at home is twisting our vertebrae out of alignment and creating strain and pain on muscles, ligaments, and joints. A scientifically designed spine and back support device that uses precision biometric technology to perfectly align the back and spine for all-day comfort and support, creating perfect posture for your back every time you sit down. Now features extra-wide acupressure comfort pads as well as an extended height back panel for even more support, making it perfect for all body types. Also features a precision wing design that perfectly cradles your back and spine with amazing ergonomic support that leaves you feeling refreshed and energized even after sitting all day.
Welcome back. The US President Donald Trump will make his first foreign trip to Saudi Arabia and will travel to Riyadh next month. That's according to a report in Axios. Trump also made Saudi Arabia his first foreign destination during his first term. Relations between the Trump administration and the Saudis have gone from strength to strength, as our senior correspondent Bianca Zanini now reports.
U.S. President Donald Trump is planning to go to Saudi Arabia for his first trip abroad since returning to the White House. The trip is reportedly planned for mid-May. Trump also chose Saudi Arabia for his first foreign trip during his previous term. Earlier this month, he said he was going to seal $1 trillion agreement with Riyadh.
I'm going to Saudi Arabia. Mr. President, I've made a deal with Saudi Arabia where, because normally you'd go to UK first, and last time I went to Saudi Arabia, they put up $450 billion. You know that, right? So I said, I'll go if you pay $1 trillion, $1 trillion to American companies, meaning the purchase over a 4-year period of $1 trillion. And they've agreed to do that. So I'm going to be going there, and I have a great relationship with them.
The decision to go to Saudi Arabia first is a strong signal of Trump's increasingly close relationship with the Gulf countries. Apart from growing economic ties, the wars in Gaza and Ukraine will likely also be on the agenda. Washington is pushing a ceasefire in Gaza, but has reportedly put talks of normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia on hold for now. Meanwhile, Riyadh is part of U.S. attempts to mediate a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, and has been touted as a possible host for a first meeting between Trump and Russia's Vladimir Putin. It is still unclear if Trump will also be visiting other countries in the region during that first trip.
Well, for more on that, we're joined by Eric Mandel. He's the founder and director of the Middle East Political Information Network. He's also the senior editor for security at the Jerusalem Report. Good to have you with us, Eric. Thank you very much for joining us. So it looks as though President Trump will once again be headed to Saudi Arabia, and he's made no secret of it in the past. He is very encouraged by the sheer staggering amount of money that Saudi Arabia is willing to invest in the United States. The UAE is doing something similar, talking about $1.3 trillion investment in the US. I mean, do you think these Gulf states are trying to peel America away from Qatar, which is also putting up a lot of money?
The administration seems to have a little bit of a love affair, both with MBS and the Saudis, but also with the Qataris. The Qataris are much more problematic. I was listening to Giddy and Yaakov Lapin earlier talking about the problems with Qatar, and the administration should eventually come to the point where it has to realize that Qatar can't be just a frenemy, it needs to move over. Now, the Saudis and the Qataris do not like one another, and I think we should put ourselves for the time being with the Saudis. So why are the Saudis better than the Qataris? We think we share common interests with them. We believe that they can help us more with regional stability, with security, counterterrorism, diplomacy. And the Saudis are looking to elevate themselves. Besides diversifying financially, they are looking to be more prominent in U.S. foreign policy. What they ultimately want is a defense pact with the United States. They want a nuclear program, a civilian nuclear program, maybe to enrich like the Iranians do, another arch enemy of theirs. And they want to buy the most sophisticated American weapons, which gets us back to that $1 trillion. It needs to be scrutinized. Is this because we are now going to be selling them weapons that the last administration wouldn't sell them? Would they have done this on their own regardless? So we shouldn't just take it at face value. But it does sound, President is a transactional president, and he wants monies to be invested in the United States. So there's multiple layers here, financial security, and Ukraine comes in and Israel comes in. So it is a complex situation that really needs to be handled very smartly from an American national security point of view.
Right, and of course the Qataris have said they will never normalise ties and have relations with Israel, whereas of course the Saudis have been talking about it for years, and we nearly got there, didn't we, right before the October 7th attacks. But the Saudis do want something in return from Israel. They want some sort of commitment to a Palestinian state further down the road. Do you think that Trump will be able to get around that this time, or are we going to see something happen?
Well, I don't believe the Saudis ever really wanted a Palestinian state. I think they were talking to their street. I remember right after October talking with the Saudi embassy in Washington of how surprised, how, if you will, radicalized the Saudi population was regarding the Palestinian issue. There was in, I think, December of 2023, a Washington Institute poll that said 96% of the Saudis that were polled wanted to cut all ties with Israel, and there shouldn't be any ties. So there is a very anti-Israel bias in Saudi Arabia. So I think the president would change the expectations, but the Israeli coalition at this point won't even give gestures towards Palestinian autonomy. Of course, not a Palestinian state. In fact, the Israeli people are really in no mood for that. In living still with active wars in the post-October 7th environment.
How is President Trump's very aggressive policy regarding the Houthis in Yemen and their backers in Iran? Are they nervous about that, or do they want Trump to continue?
Well, the Saudis were trying very hard to suppress the Houthis and failed. The UAE was the first to drop out of that coalition, and then the Saudis dropped out. And so I think the Saudis very much want America to take down the Houthis. The problem is, it's a profound American mistake. The president should follow up on his words, stop hitting the Houthis, and the address, if you want the Houthis to suppress their fire and closing the straits by Bab el-Mandeb and other places where hydrocarbons go through, is Tehran. That's really where you have to do something. So I think that is a point, and that obviously ties into Iran, nuclear, and the Iranians and the Saudis are no friends. The Saudis still are most fearful of the Iranians, and if they go nuclear, then the whole region's going to go nuclear. So, one thing ties into the other. The Houthis, the address is Tehran. For Saudi Arabia, they want to be close with America to protect them against Iran. Houthis are a secondary issue, but for Saudi Arabia, because they know it's Iran also.
Eric, great to talk to you as always. Thank you very much indeed. Eric Mandel there.
Thank you, Lauren.
Yaakov Lapp is still with us, and our diplomatic affairs correspondent Balich Sladi has joined us in the studio as well. Balich, I'll start with you. It would appear as though President Trump has managed to trigger some sort of bidding war in the Gulf, trying to get as much investment as possible in the United States in return for security guarantees.
Well, definitely that's his goal. After all, the Americans are looking for more investments in the U.S., especially right now. That's his main goal. But more than that is, of course, the ultimate goal of the U.S. in the Middle East, which is decreasing the number of soldiers in the region, and of course, focus more on the Far East, on China, and that region. So that's why that takes us back also to Israel. After all, I mean, our guest mentioned the fact that Israel is involved here, and the fact that Israelis are saying that we cannot guarantee a Palestinian state. The Israelis themselves are not keen on this idea, and that's why the Trump administration is pushing with the Israelis to end the war in Gaza in a way that Israel is turning out to be victorious in this war, ending the idea of armed resistance against Israel. Because let's go back to just before October 7th, the Saudis were willing to go for some sort of an agreement with the Israelis, but because of October 7th, that plan did not go through, and the Trump administrations, if it does understand something better than the previous administration, is that it cannot be any sort of NATO in the region, or any counter-Iran, or any way that the U.S. can actually decrease the number of soldiers until the Palestinian issue is sorted, and that cannot be sorted with Hamas staying in power in Gaza. That's what they are pushing with the Israelis to end this war, but to be victorious, to defeat Hamas in Gaza.
All right, Balia, thank you. Yaakov, President Trump will be visiting a Middle East that is completely transformed to the one he visited back in 2017.
100%. I mean, the Iranian proxy program is severely weakened. I'm not going to say eliminated, but it's a shadow of its former self. I mean, that is mainly due to Israel's military campaign against Hezbollah, against Hamas. And these had a domino effect on the Syrian regime of Assad, who fell. And so we see Iran's proxy strategy, which was one of the two main pillars of its strategy, the other being the nuclear, basically almost entirely collapse. So that is the Middle East that President Trump will be visiting. And then, the big question is what's next? And I agree that the next step is going to be focused on Israel's military defeat of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. That is going to have an effect on the entire Middle East because that will weaken the entire Iranian axis further. It will weaken jihadists in the West Bank. It will actually contribute to the stability of moderate Arab Sunni states, including, believe it or not, Jordan, even though it's very critical publicly. But at the end of the day, Hamas is an enemy of the Jordanian government and of King Abdullah especially, and Egypt, and of course the Saudis. So at the end of the day, I think, a lot hinges on this. But what's different, and what's really different from an American perspective, is their willingness to use force in a sustained manner. This is going to really help the Americans convince the Sunni Arab countries that America can be trusted to lead this coalition, this pro-American coalition. This trust was lost under the Biden administration when hardly a finger was lifted against the Houthis, and when President Biden kept saying don't, and it wasn't clear who he was.
Called the Saudis a pariah state.
Right. Yeah, there was even an arms embargo on the Saudis, and Israel was restrained. And so, at the end of the day, we're seeing a recalibration of the region. There's still a lot of work left ahead, but it's looking much more positive, I would say, for the forces of stability and moderation.
All right, thank you both. The United Arab Emirates has sentenced 3 people to death for the murder of Israeli Moldovan citizen Rabbi Tzvi Kogan in November last year. Rabbi Kogan's body was found in Al Ain, close to the border with Oman. His killers, 3 Uzbek citizens, were arrested in Turkey. The murder of Rabbi Kogan, a much-loved Chabad emissary, caused great shock and sadness in the small and young Jewish community in the UAE. For more on that, we can go to Dubai, where we're joined by Rabbi Dr. Eli Abadi, Senior Rabbi of the Jewish Council of the Emirates. Welcome, Rabbi. Thank you very much indeed for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Does this news today bring some sort of closure to your community, knowing that Rabbi Tzvi's killers have finally been brought to justice?
Indeed, it does, definitely. And it brings more security to us, albeit that the community always felt very secure in the UAE from the moment that I arrived here over 4 years ago. It was very secure. We felt very safe, and the government made sure that the Jewish community was able to grow and thrive in a very safety place.
There's a new report out today which says the UAE is the world's 2nd safest country. I mean, that is quite an achievement for the Gulf state. But I want to ask you, is that also true for Jews in the UAE? Are they safe?
Yes, absolutely. I never felt as a person, and we never heard of any person in the community that being attacked or told things. Indeed, we have been feeling safe since the beginning. As I said, the government is very keen in making sure that we feel safe. And that's how we've been left. We do feel as though UAE, if not the safest, if not the second, but the most safest country in the world. Indeed, that's how we felt. It's a place in which you could forget your wallet in the middle of a very busy place, and you're going to get it back. You forget your attaché case somewhere, and you will get it back untouched. It's definitely a very, very safe place, and we felt safe, and we continue to feel safe.
Of course, sadly, this isn't the case in a lot of Western cities, the United States, Canada, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, to mention somewhere we have seen loud and angry anti-Semitic protests. We've also seen targeted attacks on people who are visibly Jewish. You say that is not the case in the UAE?
That's not the case. It's indeed, unfortunately, in the Western world, and even in New York, when I go to New York, and I'm wearing my kippah in New York, I have to look back and see, especially in the last year or so, where is anybody following me? Is anybody going to attack me? Definitely, where New York is the largest Jewish population outside Israel as a city, yet we don't feel as safe as we feel in Dubai or Abu Dhabi or any place in the UAE.
That is very sad. How would you say your community has honoured the memory of Rabbi Kogan over the last year?
I know Rabbi Kogan personally. Was a wonderful person. It was a great tragedy, very sad for the community. He wasn't part of the people in charge of the kashrut certification. He had his own kosher supermarket. He really made the Jewish life and the Jewish community life much easier to live as a Jew and eating kosher food and the availability of kosher food. So his memory will always be remembered, and it was a great loss for the community.
Yeah, from what I can gather, he was a much-loved member of the community, so we all mourn him. Rabbi Abadi, thank you so much. Great to talk to you. Thank you.
Of course.
The US Air Force has been carrying out further airstrikes against ISIS targets in the Puntland region of Somalia. Several ISIS operatives were killed, according to the Africa Command. ISIS in Somalia is relatively small compared to the al-Qaeda-linked extremists al-Shabaab, but ISIS has been gaining strength in the semi-autonomous region. It comes amid a dispute between Mogadishu and another breakaway Somali republic, that's Somaliland. Somaliland officials have rejected Mogadishu's attempts to give exclusive rights to its Berbera port to the United States. An existing port now is operated by the UAE. It's a complex story. To break it all down for us, we're joined by Zineb Riboua. She's a research fellow at the Hudson Institute. Great to have you with us, Zineb. Thank you very much indeed. Let's start with the threat from ISIS in the Horn of Africa, because not many people associate ISIS with this part of the world. Why is it increasingly such a problem there?
Well, I would say that not only ISIS, but I think it's important now to put everything into a broader strategic context, since the United States has also carried out strikes against the Houthis. Iran's involvement also in Somalia is very covert and strategic and destabilizing, since they smuggle arms into Somalia, often via maritime routes, which supply extremist groups like ISIS and also other anti-Gulf actors with the necessary means to destabilize the country. And of course, Iran has also been using the region to extend its influence, etc., and it seeks to gain strategic depth and project power far beyond its borders. So there is the Iranian involvement, but also the terrorist threat. And now what we can see is that the Trump administration is trying to put an end to all of it.
And Somalia is and has for a long time been a failed state, but it is trying to preserve what it sees as its territorial integrity. You've got more and more foreign powers there. There is a lot of pressure, isn't there, to break up the territory, and a lot of autonomous movements within Greater Somaliland.
Yes, it seems that Somaliland really wants not just the recognition, but also a direct U.S. engagement. As you said, Somalia is a very much of a failed state. They struggle containing terrorism. They struggle with governance, with institutional reforms, etc. And of course, they struggle with safeguarding or playing any major role in the freedom of navigation and deterring asymmetric threats. And so for the United States, it really, I think, depends on the Trump administration's a willingness to recognize Somaliland and to Somaliland, or to find some way to work it out with Somalia. But it seems that for now, the United States is sending signals that the priority is to really safeguard freedom of navigation.
And Turkey stepped in to try and mediate and stop this breakup of Somalia. What happened to Turkey's efforts?
Well, Turkey is now very much caught in its efforts in Syria, in stabilizing the government, etc. Because let's not forget that it's really Turkey's success in Syria that helped it have and gain some sort of clout in the Horn of Africa. Of course, Turkey is also engaged militarily, as it has a military base in Somalia and has deep ties with the country and wants to mediate. But things are still in a standby mode, I would say.
And tell us, Zineb, how does this all fit in with Western efforts to defeat the Houthis in Yemen? They, of course, are just across the water from Somaliland.
Well, I think that for the Houthis, more strikes, but also there is something that the Trump administration did, which I found very clever, because they also sanctioned China for purchasing oil from Iran, and those sanctions and this maximum pressure campaign that they're putting is really squeezing the Houthis, not just in terms of their capabilities, but also in terms of how they are working, how they are fueling their system, and also in purchase of logistics, etc. So I think that this is they see, of course, this as a threat, but what is happening in Somalia is, of course, a threat to the Red Sea as well, and I think that they are conducting several strikes, and we will see more, I believe, because really clearing the Red Sea is part of Trump administration's top priorities in the Middle East currently. It sends a strong deterrence message to Iran and also to ISIS operatives.
Zina Brewer at the Hudson Institute, thank you. Well, US airstrikes continue to pound Houthi targets in Yemen. The Iranian-backed group said strikes on the capital Sana'a killed at least 3 people. So, Berlin, we're getting this drip, drip, drip of Houthi missile attacks on Israel, aren't we? We had the latest one just yesterday. Is there any sign that those US airstrikes are having any effect?
Well, 2 interesting things are not happening. First of all, the Houthis are not attacking ships in the Red Sea. That's first of all. Maybe because they're busy with the Americans, and maybe because, as they say, the Israeli ships are not moving through the Red Sea. That's why they are not attacking ships. That's first of all. Second, the Houthis are once again firing at Israel, but Israel is not attacking them back. That's happening because the Americans don't want to frame this as an operation to help Israel. The Americans are telling the Israelis, and that's according to Israeli officials, we're good, we're managing it, don't attack the Houthis for now, because the Americans want to tell the American people that this is an operation to preserve the freedom of navigation and not an operation to help the Israelis. After all, the Americans are continuing with their efforts right now. We see that the Houthis, according to Israeli officials, are estimated to have only dozens left of missiles, not more. The estimation before was that they have much, much more. But we're talking about ballistic missiles, of course, that they can reach the Israeli territory. Now the estimation is that they have only dozens left. This could be the issue. This could be not the situation. We just need to wait and see on that. But the Americans, for now, first of all, they're building up their strategic bombers in Diego Garcia, while reports also talking about some mysterious runway on a Yemeni island that is not controlled by the Houthis, by the way, right in the middle of Bab el-Mandab, that also can be used by the Americans, by the Saudi-led coalition. So we see that it's apparently only the beginning. And again, if they have only dozens of ballistic missiles left, it's only a matter of time where they can no more attack Israel as well.
All right, Valia, thank you very much. And Yaakov, I mean, this is a world away from, a year ago when Israel really felt it was fighting alone, fighting the Houthis, fighting Iran, fighting on all these fronts. Do you think there's a sense that Israel can take a breath now because the Americans have stepped in?
Absolutely. When we're talking about the Houthi front, the Israeli Air Force does not need to now dedicate resources, refuelers. I'm not going to say intelligence because I suspect that there is intelligence cooperation with the United States, but operationally speaking, this frees the Israeli Air Force to focus on Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and all the immediate arenas around us, as well as, I assume, prepare for the contingency of a possible strike against Iran's nuclear program if Iran continues to make alarming progress on its uranium enrichment and nuclear infrastructure. So this is absolutely freeing up resources primarily for the Israeli Air Force, and it's a very, very welcome change from the reality that we had, as you said, a year ago.
All right, Yaakov Lapin, Balich Sladin, thank you very much to you both. Now, a day after Syria's Kurds rejected the new government in Damascus, there are signs of some cooperation when it comes to sharing valuable oil resources. Our Alex Schloss has this report.
Months after insurgents ended over half a century of the Assad dynasty's rule in Syria, the country's new Islamist interim government has been struggling to fix its plague the country. Damascus is now looking towards the country's northeast, where oil fields under Kurdish-led authorities could boost energy security.
The deal made between the Kurdish administration and the Damascus administration, represented by Ahmad al-Shara'a, the de facto president of Syria, states that the self-ruled administration supplies Syria with approximately 15,000 barrels of crude oil and 1 million cubic meters of gas for domestic use and essential needs.
Before Syria descended into civil war, crucial oil fields were under the control of the central government in Damascus, but then fell into the hands of ISIS, who carved out a so-called caliphate across large swaths of Syria and Iraq between 2014 and 2017. After ISIS fell, the US-backed Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces took control of the fields, leaving them away from Damascus, a situation that the government hopes to revert through deals signed with the SDF.
Hopefully, with this deal, people will benefit from the oil products to help develop the country's economy.
The Kurdish area has never denied the unity of Syria and has emphasized that the oil belongs to all Syrian people. Oil products, oil wealth, and even agricultural wealth should be equally distributed among the people in all Syrian provinces.
While shortages in equipment and supplies and clashes that persist with Turkey and Turkish-backed forces have slowed down production, Damascus and Kurdish authorities are pushing ahead with their plans to resume the oil flows to bring the much-needed energy supplies and cash injections into the battered nation.
Stay tuned. David Matlin is up next with the rundown. Good night. Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are? Introducing i24 News' brand new news website. On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it. So what are you waiting for? Download the i24 News app today.
How do you get your news? How do you know what sources to trust? And to paint a clear picture of the entire story, you need a breakdown of the constant stream of events, top stories, expert analysts, and the best journalists bringing you real voices on the ground. We're breaking it all down on The Rundown. Get the facts, stay informed, and be a voice of reason for the Middle East.
Introducing the brand new i24 News Video On Demand app. You'll have instant access to all our programs, reports, in-depth discussions, and expert commentary, all at your fingertips, whenever you want it. So what are you waiting for? Download the i24 News Video On Demand app today.
Large-scale evacuation warnings are issued to Palestinians in the southern Gaza Strip as the Israel Defense Force works to clear non-combatants from the battlefield. The so-called Qatargate affair deepens in Israel, with Benjamin Netanyahu testifying before the investigating police and the arrest of 2 additional aides to the prime minister. And the Iranian leader issues fresh threats of a quote-unquote counterattack to the United States, seen as Tehran's official response to President Trump's ultimatums to disarm under a new nuclear deal or face the military option. Welcome to the Rundown here, live from Tel Aviv. I'm David Matlin. Thanks for joining us here as we get into the day's top stories. We begin as the Israel Defense Force issued evacuation warnings for Palestinians in the entire Rafah area of the southern Gaza Strip, declaring that the military is, quote, returning to fight with great force to eliminate the capabilities of terror organizations in these areas, close quote. Now, it marks the largest evacuation order issued by the IDF since the resumption of this offensive against Hamas that began earlier this month. And once again, it came with detailed maps of the safe zones for non-combatants along the coast. Now, the IDF still has work to do in Gaza, based on a number of factors. The Biden administration, Israeli hostages among them. Up to now, Israeli troops hardly operated in the urbanized and tunnel-ridden swath of territory between Rafah and Khan Yunis, a known hub of the Hamas regime. And our Joe Brown is down on the border region there, reporting tonight from southern Israel. Joe, Israeli forces we see, or at least according to the reports we can gauge, are moving into areas around Rafah recently. Gazans are being told to move to safe zones, per these reports. Again, what's that movement of people look like so far in there? What can we tell?
Well, not only is this the largest evacuation order since the resumption of the fighting early this month, but this is actually one of the largest evacuation orders throughout the entirety of this war since October the 7th. This is a large part of the southern Gaza Strip, more or less everything south of Khan Yunis, and this includes the area of Rafah along the Gaza-Egypt border. This is a very important strategic area for Israel. This is where a lot of the weapons are smuggled from Israel. They go through, from Egypt, they go through Rafah and into the hands of Hamas. And this is also where a lot of Hamas groups and Hamas-affiliated groups are. During the first instance of fighting, when the IDF entered Rafah in May 2024, they found the bodies of multiple hostages. And this was actually the last place that the IDF went into in Gaza. There was a lot of talk as to whether they won't do it because it's too risky with the amount of terrorists that are there, and also the potential risking the lives of the hostages. But the IDF has put out the evacuation order on that area. Earlier today, and for a large part of the afternoon, we were at an Israeli kibbutz that was overlooking this area of Gaza, the southern part of the Strip, looking into Khan Yunis and Rafah, and it was completely quiet. Usually when you get an evacuation order, that's followed by airstrikes, and with airstrikes you can see them, you can feel them, and you can hear them. But then we went a little bit further up north to Sderot, which is where we are now, overlooking the Beit Hanun area, and as soon as we were there, we heard rockets, we felt them, and we saw the plumes of smoke. So the IDF operations are seemingly continuing, not just in the areas that they said to evacuate, but also in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. But just because we didn't see anything from the southern parts of the Gaza Strip does not mean that things are not happening. We've seen videos on social media of thousands of Gazans who were hoping to celebrate Eid al-Fitr today, the final day of Ramadan, the celebration for Muslim people. They were hoping to celebrate this at home, but instead they have been displaced, and the IDF are going to expand their operations in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. We didn't see any airstrikes right now. Could this be a precursor for a larger ground invasion? That's very possible, but we won't be able to tell that just yet, because all we know so far is that the IDF has said that they will be around that area and that they will be striking.
Joe Brown coming to us from the border region here. Quiet for the moment, not likely to be quiet for long. Thanks for the report. Bringing in the studio here now, we have our Correspondent Belio Saladin in the studio with us, and security analyst Yaakov Lapin. Thank you both, gentlemen. Yaakov, coming to you first on what we're looking at in and around Gaza right now. We see the reports that the IDF is maneuvering in various parts of the Strip, evacuation orders, large-scale ones going out right now to any non-combatants, people who don't want to be in the mix of that fray with the IDF, being told to move. But there are large areas of Gaza here where the IDF hasn't operated yet. And I've seen this myself, that despite all the images that people are familiar with from Gaza of destruction, there are massive built-up urban centers of Gaza, of the Gaza Strip, still intact, untouched. What is expected to be waiting for the IDF there? And what do we make so far of the relative quiet from the groups that are waiting for Israeli soldiers in Gaza at this point?
So I think that the relative quiet is a combination. First of all, they are being assaulted from the air in a very sustained manner that makes it difficult for them to move around. But I have no doubt that Hamas and PIJ spent the past 2+ months trying to rebuild some of their lost capabilities. And that means booby traps in buildings, that means snipers, that means newly armed terrorists, often very young, with zero combat experience, but just given, an AK or an anti-tank missile, or it's hidden and they wander around as civilians, they pick it up, they fire on the IDF on site. So it's classic guerrilla warfare. That's what's waiting for the IDF moving in there. But I expect that their Air Force is going to continue softening up these areas before the military moves in, while we're seeing the Gazan civilian population once again comply with IDF evacuation calls. And it's important to note that these are calls. The IDF can't force Gazan civilians to leave. They can call on them to leave. And most times when the IDF calls on them to leave, they leave.
Yaakov, what do we know about how much Israeli control is being asserted around this evacuation zone? I understand there's one significant evacuation zone now. Who's monitoring who's going in and out of there? What do we know about how this is being managed so far? Is there much known?
Yeah, I mean, it's Southern Command. And within IDF Southern Command, there is an entire unit that's in charge of communicating with the population. They do this through a combination of tools, and they do monitor these movements very, very closely. In fact, they've actually divided the Gaza Strip into hundreds of polygons, right. And these are color-coded polygons. And so when it turns green, that means something like 75% or more of the population has left. And that's when they know that they're good to go in terms of sending large numbers of ground forces in. So this is all almost scientifically monitored in ways that I don't think any other military operates.
Efforts being made that we have not seen in any other conflict in terms of managing a local population, a hostile one at that. And I just ask in terms of that being one of the sort of loopholes or issues for the IDF in the first round of campaign here, these various zones that were hard to control. We'll be right back with another element to the story here, and it's one that captivated us for days and days on end here as we saw these demonstrations, highly unusual ones, popping up in the Gaza Strip against the Hamas regime. But shortly before, he was kidnapped and tortured to death by Hamas. It was 22-year-old Odai Nasser al-Rabi. He filmed himself describing how Hamas was pursuing him before they eventually shot he and his brother. Now, he asked his brother, we should say, to publish this video that was if anything happened to him. Take a look.
يديكم العافية يا جماعة الخير. أنا طبعا خلصت الحرب وتون حماس تهجموا علينا وبدهم إيانا بدهم يطخوني ومن قبل ما بدهم إيانا وبدهم يطخوني كبسوا علي تو كمان وقبل فترة كمان طخوا أخويا ولحتى الآن مش عارفين من اللي طخوا. إجوا ناس ملتمين عليه أظن قسام والله أعلم وطخوه وانا من الصبح شارد واجوا كبسوا علينا على الدار بدهم اياني ومش عارف ايش بدي اعمل لان هلقيت في الفترة هذه وعندنا غزة مدينة اشباح وانا شارد في الشارع مش عارف وين مش عارف ايش اللي بدهم اياه بالضبط منا مش عارف هلكونا ونكبونا ومش عارف ايش اللي بدهم اياه من الشباب. ايش بدهم قاعدين كلهم مبلتين في رجليهم كلهم ولا ايش؟ والله الواحد ما يعرف ايش بده يعني. الله يفرجها وخلص وحسبي الله ونعم الوكيل عليه.
And Belio, on this subject again, we saw. First of all, this reports of executions, not just this case. There have been these reports emerging now of this brutal crackdown on some, at least, leader elements, maybe we can call them, of people who are emerging in this protest publicly, profiled. Are there still, manifestations of this discontent with Hamas appearing in Gaza? What's happened to this movement in the meantime?
Exactly. I mean, you're definitely right, and we've talked about this also when it started last week, that after 3-4 days, we see that the intensity is degrading, and it looks like the movement is not taking off. After all, it's calming down. This comes right when the Eid started, the Eid al-Fitr started. Some attribute it to the Eid, but others say that the movement did not take off, and Hamas did succeed in managing this issue. Farah sources in Gaza are saying that Hamas operatives are carrying out executions to people who participated in the protest. They do this away from camera lenses, without wearing the Qassam Brigade uniform, of course, in order not to be captured by cameras. This indicates one thing, that Hamas's power is maintained in Gaza. They are still the sole power in the Gaza Strip, and because they did not also get enough coverage, for example, from the really important media in the Palestinian community, Al Jazeera and others. They did not cover this. They framed it differently, and that's why this thing did not take off. By the way, a source that spoke with El Sharq al-Awsat today, a source from Hamas, say that although that we did not pay the salaries for Hamas's operatives, the military and the civilian operatives and members this month, and also the series of assassination by Israel since the beginning of the war, the resumption of the war, I should say, we still have the power to rule Gaza. Just when the ceasefire is announced one more time, we will come back with our uniform and we will lead Gaza one more time. By the way, this is confirmed by Israeli officials as well. They say that Hamas still maintains its military and civilian power in spite of the recent events.
Wow, so a lot to stay tuned. Balir, thanks for that so far. Another layer to all of this, obviously, the Israeli hostages, some recently released from Gaza, revealed additional harrowing details from their time in captivity, appearing on the highly viewed CBS 60 Minutes. Now, for his part, Yarden Bibas says Hamas taunted him over his murdered wife and 2 young children, while Keith Siegel was forced to watch the sexual assault of female hostages. Here's more from their gut-wrenching revelations.
Disturbing new testimonies are emerging from Israeli hostages released from Gaza. In his first interview since being freed on February 1st, Yarden Bibas spoke to CBS's 60 Minutes. While in captivity, Hamas forced him to appear on camera after telling him that his wife Shiri and their 2 children, 4-year-old Ariel and 9-month-old Kfir, had been killed in an Israeli airstrike. But Yarden insists he knows the truth. His family was murdered by terrorists. His Hamas captors told him it was fine.
They were murdered in cold blood, bare hands. They used to tell me, doesn't matter. You get a new wife, get a new kids, better wife, better kids.
They said that to you?
Yeah, many times. Many times.
Yarden believes the renewed Israeli military operations in Gaza will not pressure Hamas into releasing the remaining hostages. He chose an American outlet for his first interview because he believes U.S. President Donald Trump can help secure the freedom of more Israelis.
I know he can help. I'm here because of Trump. I'm here only because of him.
Meanwhile, another recently released hostage, American-Israeli Keith Siegel, shared his own trauma, revealing that he was forced to watch the sexual assault of female hostages by terrorists.
I witnessed a young woman who was being tortured by the terrorists. I mean, literal, torture, not just in a figurative sense.
They made you watch it?
Yeah. I saw sexual assault with female hostages.
Keith said his spirit was completely broken. Another freed hostage, Tal Shoham, recalls the devastating conversations with Guy Gilboa Dalal and Evyatar David, still held in Gaza, who openly spoke about taking their own lives due to the unbearable conditions.
One of the toughest things that I heard from them, they told me more than once that why to stay alive now? I mean, why just to not take their own life with their own hand and to finish it? I mean, to get released from this.
And they will do it together if they decide to do it.
Even after their release, the former hostages continue to fight for those left behind, while grappling with their own trauma. They feel a sense of urgency and fear that time is running out. 24 hostages in Gaza are believed to still be alive.
And still with our guys in the studio here, and as we're looking at 60 Minutes, Yaakov, obviously this is massive viewership in the United States. Left wondering, first of all, applaud the producers and people who put together the show for bringing this back as a feature item. But the impact that this has on the American public, still one of the highest viewed programs in the United States. Impact perhaps on President Trump himself. I know he's had exposure to these issues a lot on his own, but of course, just left wondering the sort of impact on the American side of the story. What do you speculate that this takes this issue or maybe drives it in American policy?
I think this was vital. This was such an important report by 60 Minutes to bring the unimaginable human suffering endured by Israeli hostages and the indescribable brutality of Hamas, both things on full display during this program. And it's, I think, a very important reminder to the American public about who Israel is dealing with in the Gaza Strip, why it's vital to defeat this genocidal adversary. And I think it's, hopefully going to also have a bipartisan effect, if I can use that term. Yeah. And, basically counteract any kind of trend that we've been seeing, regarding everything in the United States, and not just the United States, being politicized. And if you're on one side of the camp, then you're for Israel, and if you're on the other side, then you might be a lot more critical. This is the kind of revelation, I hope, that will basically counteract that and make it clear to the American people, who are, by every poll, remain, the majority of which remain very supportive of Israel's right to self-defense. This will hopefully inject another reminder about what's at stake at this, in this war.
I believe we heard Yarden Bibas say it in there that he's out thanks to Trump. We're seeing these crowds in Israeli streets, sort of cries for "Save us, President Trump." There's sort of this feeling that the president holds the keys to the situation. I know Israeli society is wrestling with this, need to pursue, Gazan terrorists militarily and the need to pursue hostages diplomatically. What do we know about that diplomatic track at this point? The Egyptians have been in the middle of this a little bit. What's the latest that's been put on the table? Where do those efforts stand?
Yeah, first of all, I do agree that President Trump has a lot of weight on Netanyahu, but just as Netanyahu did not listen to President Biden, and he thought that it's also important to secure Israel's security future, not only bringing back the hostages, is something that is Israel should insist on. So he should also be able to say that to Trump as well. But anyway, currently, we're still talking about this Egyptian proposal and the counter-Israeli proposal. Yesterday, it was reported by Israeli officials that they are willing to discuss the second phase of the deal if Hamas do agree to this current counter-proposal. Israel is offering 40 days of ceasefire, not 50. Hamas wants 50. They are saying that on the first day, we want 10 living Israeli hostages back, plus Idan Alexander. So it's 11 Israeli hostage, the American-Israeli hostage. On the fifth day, Israel is demanding a full list with names of the remaining Israeli hostages in Gaza, with their condition. We remember that in the previous deal, they gave only a list that is a number of Israeli hostages that are alive and who are dead, only a numerical one.
Stunning, we don't have
names.
Any information.
And the 10th day, the 16th body is 16 bodies of Israeli hostages should be back on the 16th day. Now, I don't have the Hamas's answer to this, but I would say that Hamas will say no, of course, because after all, they know that Israel wants to eradicate them, and their only play card is the hostages. So they will not give up on the hostages easily. That's why we should expect Israel to increase the military pressure. But what we see for now is actually not the hell that Israel is talking about. Israeli security officials are talking about 5 divisions to be deployed in Gaza back against it. We're talking about around 50,000 Israeli soldiers back in Gaza. That would be the hell. The only unfortunate reality here is that the hostages' fate will be in jeopardy. No one knows whether they can be rescued or not.
A lot more to say on this, obviously, gentlemen. Got another topic here to get in before the break here. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu testified this afternoon in the so-called Qatargate affair. It's after being summoned by police per the instructions of the Attorney General. The Prime Minister met with the investigating officers. That's after 2 additional members of his staff were arrested by police earlier today in connection with this now growing scandal that involves suspected unlawful ties between senior aides to Netanyahu and Qatar. I-24 News' Lynn Flachmeyer is the latest.
Two top aides to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu were arrested Monday morning as suspects in the so-called Qatar Gate. Jonathan Ulrich and Eli Feldstein are accused of having links to Qatar via an international firm contracted by Doha to feed Israeli journalists pro-Qatari stories. Earlier this month, police questioned both Feldstein and Ulrich on suspicion of contacting a foreign agent, fraud, money laundering and bribery. Netanyahu was questioned by police in the case regarding the alleged unlawful financial ties between his senior staffers and Qatar. But Netanyahu is not treated as a suspect in the case, but rather as someone with knowledge of the affair. The investigation focuses specifically on alleged Qatari payments to Netanyahu's close circle between May 2022 and October 2024. The investigation was under the orders of Shin Bet chief Ronen Bar, who Netanyahu is currently trying to fire. Netanyahu's Likud party has come out with a statement accusing the Attorney General's office and Shin Bet chief Ronen Bar of, quote, conducting futile investigations in the dark under a gag order in an attempt to prevent the dismissal of the Shin Bet chief, using Ulrich and others as cannon fodder. The statement continues saying, their goal is to carry out a coup d'etat through arrest warrants. This is not an investigation. This is not law enforcement. This is an attempted assassination of democracy and an attempt to replace the will of the people with the rule of bureaucrats. Opposition leader Yair Lapid says this statement does not deny that Ulrich and Feldstein received money from Doha. Another political rival, Avigdor Lieberman, accuses Netanyahu of trying to divert public attention away from Qatargate by firing the Shin Bet chief. And so, as a most recent Israeli poll shows, 70% of the public say that they do not trust Netanyahu's government. Qatargate is unlikely to bring that number down.
Now we're joined by senior journalist at Yediot Ahronoth, Ben-Gurion University. Ben-Gurion, good to have you back on the program. Always something pressing to get your thoughts on. I'm going to jump right into it. On the backdrop of the open strife between the Prime Minister and the Attorney General, the now on his way out intelligence chief, Ronen Bar, it struck me that I feel that there's a greater significance to the Prime Minister actually showing up today for testimony after the Attorney General called for it. Was that at risk? To me, that was an element of the story that I thought, is he going to listen to this? Is he going to show up and testify? What stood out to you today?
First of all, of course, he showed up. Now, there was not any question. Will he agree to testify or not? He did. Of course he did. The point is that we don't need more details. I mean, maybe many more details will be exposed in the next few days, weeks, I don't know. But according to what we know up to now, it's terrible. I mean, when Qatar is funding Harvard or Yale or Columbia or any other university, we are furious because we know what is the meaning of this funding. It's not because of the nice eyes of the presidents of the universities. They want to have influence. They want to change policy. And they do succeed, as we all know, about what is happening in the American academia. But they are doing it in the holy of holiest places in Israel, in the Prime Minister office. I mean, where are we? I mean, we don't have to wait to something else, like if, okay, maybe they gave some information. They reached out, Qatar reached out to the office of the Prime Minister. They funded some very senior top aides of Netanyahu. I mean, it's a scandal. It is scandal, even if some people do not understand, and I do not, of course, understand this kind of Likud announcement. What they are talking about, I don't understand. What are they talking about? I mean, how can they excuse the very fact that they do not even refute that two top aides received money from Qatar? I mean, who they are complaining against? I mean, I don't understand their announcement. It's kind of crazy. I mean, what they are trying to do? To manipulate the public opinion? Unfortunately, it looks like if that's what they are trying to do, because they do not answer the questions. What happened there? How comes that it happened? How comes that the prime minister did not know? And if he knew, it's even much worse. And if he did not know, how comes that two top aides receive money from Qatar and you don't even know?
Ben-Gurion, a lot of people are saying this is one of the main reasons why the Shin Bet chief is being ousted, that he's investigating these types of things going on. Is there, is there legitimacy to these kind of claims at this point? What's it look like?
Look, of course, we all know this argument. Maybe it will be decided by the Supreme Court, because just on the ground of only one question, was he fired before the investigation began, or was he fired after the investigation began? Now, I don't know. I cannot tell you. Some people say one way, some people say the other way. I don't know. But of course, there is no need to say this is, according to the law, a decision of the government. So legally, it was okay. The only one point will be, when did it begin? After Netanyahu knew or before Netanyahu knew? This is the only one question that will be the main question in the Supreme Court.
Now, Qatar's not designated as an enemy state at this point. In fact, it's a government that clearly Israel's been working with on a lot of levels recently. Is this pushing a shift in the thinking towards Qatar? Does this necessitate, in some ways, an institutional change of posture towards Qatar?
Yeah, well, formally, according to the law, Qatar was not declared as an enemy state. But this is an enemy state. I mean, we know exactly what Qatar is. We know exactly what Qatar is as the headquarters of the Muslim Brothers. We know exactly who they funded. Not only here, not only the Hamas, even in Syria. Who did they fund? Only the Islamists. So we know exactly what is Al Jazeera. The biggest tool of propaganda and brainwashing in the Arab world. We know exactly, and as I mentioned already, the universities. It's an enemy, even if it was not declared as formally, legally, as an enemy state.
A lot of change in the air likely here. Ben-Gurion University, thanks for being with us on the subject here. One of the headlining across Israel today. Thank you. Now, Israel and Egypt, they've maintained what's probably best described outwardly as a cold peace since 1979. But tensions have been on the rise since the surprise attack on Israel from the Gaza Strip, notably with the enclave's Egyptian border now understood to be that main route that delivered Hamas its most deadly arsenal. And after various reports emerged recently, Israeli security officials are now making some noise about an ongoing Egyptian army buildup in the Sinai Peninsula bordering Israel. I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Guy Azrael has more on the developing situation there.
It is a stark warning that we're hearing today from a senior Israeli defense official, and he is speaking about the deployment of the military forces of Egypt at the Sinai Peninsula. And I can remind you and the viewers that under the 1979 peace accords between Israel and Egypt, the military presence of Egypt in Sinai is supposed to be very limited, but that in recent years is not the case. We're hearing from this official who tells us Egypt is militarizing the Sinai Peninsula in what seems as a violation of the peace agreement, and he is specifying those violations. He says Egypt has deployed military forces beyond the permitted quota, expanded port docks, and extended runways at airports, all of these in violation of the agreement. Now, the Israelis are very clear in saying that Israel seeks to maintain the peace treaty and will not alter its deployment along the border. This official notes that the military activity in Sinai is expected to be restricted, but that is not the case. He says we will not accept these breaches. And so this Israeli official tells us we are in discussions with Cairo and the Americans. He says the U.S. administration is responsible for upholding the peace treaty, and it is imperative to rectify these violations and ensure the agreement is fully adhered to. And the official therefore says we have raised these concerns with our colleagues in Washington. So we should say that these violations have begun over 10 years ago, of course, when Egypt was dealing with cells of Al-Qaeda and ISIS at the Sinai Peninsula. Israel, until now, has turned a blind eye to this military activity. But now we are hearing it clearly from this Israeli officials saying Israel will no longer tolerate those violations.
Before we move on, just another update here around the Qatar Gate affair. And Blair in the studio here, just as we're speaking here, another development here. What came out?
Netanyahu just published a video after his testimony. He's saying that this is a political investigation, a witch hunt, and there is nothing here to see because the investigation, actually, a testimony that he that when he was with the policemen, actually with the investigators, actually they ran out of questions. That's what he said. Only after an hour, and then they took a break for an hour and a half, and they came back after 10 minutes only, and then they left. That's what he is saying. And I should mention something here. Ronen Sur, the former manager of the PR for the Families of the Hostages Forum, posted a post today on X. He said that when the war began, Netanyahu sat with them and told them to attack Qatar, actually. Wow. He said that this is the right thing to do, to put pressure on Qatar. Now, of course, Ronen Sur was critical of Netanyahu. He said that, on the other hand, his aides were giving services to Qatar and were on a payroll from Qatar. But it is interesting that Netanyahu, on one hand, is understanding that you should actually attack Qatar, and what we are seeing here today. Again, we talked about this in the flashes as well. The timing is very interesting here. That it's just happening hours after the statement that the Prime Minister's office issued about the appointing of the new chief of the Shin Bet. So this is this means only one thing, maybe, that Israel is now in a mess. There is a crisis here. The political spectrum here, the political issue is getting into every single issue that we face, and that's very, very concerning, especially during such a war, of course.
Yeah. Leo, thanks for the update there. We'll continue bringing all the updates to you, our viewers, as they emerge around this scandal and any others. We look at Iran right now, where the supreme leader, the Ayatollah, he issued fresh threats to the United States today, saying that America will, quote, definitely receive a strong counterattack, close quote, as if it takes any military action against Iran's nuclear programs. Now, President Trump has threatened to bomb if Tehran does not meet the U.S. demands to disarm under the framework of a new nuclear deal with Washington. But for good measure, the Tehran Times wrote on X that Iran's missiles are, quote, loaded onto launchers in all underground missile cities and are ready for launch, close quote. And in case we may be thinking they've softened their stance, given recent losses in the region, the Ayatollah also reminded his audience that Israel must be eradicated. But here's more from Tehran.
Nations worldwide are angry and upset, and that's just based on what they know. There are many issues and atrocities nations worldwide are not even aware of. The anti-Zionist regime and anti-US chants that you see in the streets of Europe, and even the United States, stem from their limited knowledge. Would do more if they knew more. All I'm saying is this rogue group, Israel, must be eradicated from Palestine. The enmity from the US and Israel has always been there. They threaten to attack us, which we don't think is very probable, but if they commit any mischief, they will surely receive a strong reciprocal blow. If they are thinking of causing sedition inside the country, as in past years, the Iranian people themselves will deal with them, same as before.
Now we're joined by Behnam Ben Taleblu, Senior Fellow for the Foundation for Defense of Democracy, joining us from Washington. So appreciate your time with us here. I want to bring us back to the letter that President Trump sent. I think it's dated sometime around March 19th that he sent to the Ayatollah. Gave a 2-month ultimatum to disarm. What do you make then of the sort of seriousness or the significance of that now? Is it apparent in Iran's response today?
Well, it's great to be with you. I think the Islamic Republic is trying to engage in a tit-for-tat rhetorical escalation against the Trump administration and against President Trump in particular. I think their response to Trump's offer of direct negotiations is indirect private negotiations mediated by a country that has been used in the past, such as Oman, for example. These more recent comments by the Supreme Leader are aimed, one, to kind of bolster the regime's already battered deterrence, two, try to downplay the actual change in President Trump's increasing commentary and clarity about a potential military option against the Islamic Republic. So there's political signaling and some real military signaling here from what Iran's supreme leader is saying. But it's also designed to kind of do what everything else he's been doing for the past few months has been, which is to find a way to limp along and buy time.
Look, it looks instead like President Trump, and if we're reading into the letter, for example, and things that have been said, that instead of, say, President Obama's arms control efforts here, that Trump is seeking some sort of verifiable disarmament, a dismantling of the nuclear facilities, or else? Is there a credible threat there attached?
That's indeed what the Trump administration is signaling. In particular, Mike Waltz has actually used the language of dismantlement or disarmament in a recent Senate hearing, for example, with the DNI. U.S. Senator Tom Cotton, I believe, actually used similar language about dismantling or disarmament vis-a-vis the Islamic Republic. And I think that's the correct approach. If you are going to dance with the devil, and that should be a big if here, because there's the utility of a whole host of other options rather than diplomacy with the Islamic Republic. But if that is what the Trump administration wants, there really only is one deal worth seeking, and that's not to kick the can down the road like the JCPOA did when you have the nuclear program coming back at you. It is to actually dismantle that illicit atomic infrastructure from the get-go.
Now, the big question I want to throw you away here. Look, there's been a lot of us here in Israel wondering why we haven't struck yet at the nuclear infrastructure. Is this about, say, détente with Russia? What's the bigger geopolitical considerations at play here that have maybe held the U.S. and Israel back from some kind of move on Iran's nuclear programs?
Well, it's about, I think, if it's respect to Israel's military option against the Islamic Republic, it's quite clear after last April and last October that Israel, through creativity, through a qualitative military edge, can indeed strike and destroy most, if not all, of the regime's above ground facilities. The real question is the subterranean facilities, particularly nuclear enrichment facilities, potential centrifuge construction facilities, and underground missile and military bases. For that, I think the U.S. would have to be involved to make sure the job is finished. And that indeed would bring the U.S. in when it comes to reprisals, making sure its bases are clear, and the ultimate political goal of the military use of force, which is this merely counter-proliferation or counter-regime? And I think there, various U.S. and Israeli governments have not been on the same page. Let's hope that they can get on the same page and quickly, given that mounting Iranian nuclear and other threat.
Ben Talablu, thanks for being with us from D.C.
Thank you.
Bringing that into the studio here on the Iranian issue as well, still with Belia Sladin and Yaakov Lapin here. Look, what about from Israeli officials, Yaakov? What can we read here from Prime Minister Netanyahu about any potential plans for Iran?
Okay, so I think, we have two lenses to look at this from here in Israel. First of all, militarily, I think it's safe to assume that the Israeli Air Force is using this time to better prepare its long-range capability. That means intelligence, that means munitions, all of the things that are involved. It's already reached Iran. It's taken over Iran's skies. There was nothing Iran could do about it back in October. So we already have the precedent. And obviously a strike on the nuclear program would be much more advanced. We don't know if it would be with or without the United States. But militarily, I think it's safe to assume that the IDF is preparing for that contingency. Politically, there are some big questions because on the one hand, certainly I think Israel welcomes the American posture, the movement of heavy bombers, B-2 bombers that can carry 30,000 and 20,000 bombs. Yeah. These are the largest air-dropped explosives known to man. So this is obviously a step in the right direction, but we have some unknowns here, which is what kind of deal does Trump want to reach? Yeah. Who is going to oversee the so-called dismantling of the Iranian nuclear program? And there's another elephant in the room, which is what is going to be done about the existence of the Iranian regime itself, because that's where the real deep threat comes from. It's that regime. And they've built up the nuclear knowledge, so they know how to press, freeze, and hold. They know how to basically wait out any American administration. So there are really big questions at play, and we'll have to let time deliver some of those answers.
Thank you, Yaakov. We shift our perspective again here. Now, Europe, they're scrambling to rearm under the Readiness 2030 program in response to Washington's apparent pivot towards Russia and the ongoing war in Ukraine. And that apparent rush to militarize could mean good business for Israeli defense and technology firms. With more, though, here's our correspondent, Robert Swift.
Israel is known the world over as a defense innovator and arms supplier. Despite the country's small size, it is the 8th largest arms exporter globally. So it's no surprise that as Europe looks to rearm, Israeli defense and tech companies are sensing business opportunities ahead.
The era of the peace dividend is long gone. The security architecture that we relied on can no longer be taken for granted.
Trade and research connections between Israel and Europe are not new, with Israeli defense tech underpinning the relationship.
I would mention a long-strike artillery, precise ammunition, uncrewed systems, digital armies, communication, electric warfare spectrum. These are just an example of capabilities that we are already providing to numerous countries in Europe, and definitely based on what is happening in Ukraine and Russia, and what was demonstrated in the last year and a half in our area in the Iron Sword War, I would imagine that we will see the appetite of these solutions are continuing and expanding in Europe as well.
But with the European Union looking to invest 800 billion euros in defense spending over the next 4 years, these connections are likely to scale considerably.
If you want to set up a national security framework for your country, particularly your European country in our case, you must be doing business with Israel in order to construct the defensive approaches, the defensive domes, if you will, from missiles, from drones, from cyber attacks, from all sorts of things that help you protect your nation, help you provide national security. And you shouldn't need the push that might be coming from the Americans.
Not only are Israeli defense firms in line for additional business from Europe, but so too are tech companies, with cyber at the forefront.
The immediate effect of something like what's happening with Trump and Europe and everything, it hits the big companies. But if you follow it for a couple of months, you will see that every subcontractor that works with them is now required to do something new or something additional that it wasn't required. That is really the big wave, and it's just beginning now.
As Israeli firms increase their trade with Europe, they are likely to hire local staff, open offices, and begin exploring mergers and acquisitions, which can help with navigating Europe, which is not unified, but is rather a cluster of markets.
There are some additional challenges that relate to the European procurement processes, et cetera, in particular. The European market's smaller than the US market. The European market is highly fragmented. It's fragmented in terms of national policies. So even though the EU has announced the 800 billion euro program, individual countries are still going to make their own defense spending decisions.
Israeli technologies are often more easily integrated and have a proven track record, two factors which could prove important against competing suppliers.
Our capabilities and solutions are fielded, are operational. The Israeli Defense Forces, and not only, are using them on a daily basis. We are developing and presenting an open architecture solution, so it could be easily integrated.
Diplomatic considerations, including unease in some EU states over how Israel wages its wars, could influence expanding trade ties. But with Europe feeling increasingly isolated from the US, realpolitik may force it to turn a blind eye to such considerations. With or without such business, Israeli firms will keep developing new military technologies.
When we innovate, it's an existential requirement. If we don't innovate and we're not at the cutting edge, then we're not anymore. There's no higher motivator than that, which puts us in the front line of developing technologies.
Now facing a slim Republican majority in the House of Representatives, President Trump says he pulled Congresswoman Elise Stefanik's nomination to serve as UN ambassador because he doesn't want to, quote, take any chances. Now, Stefanik, a staunch ally of Israel and Republican from New York in the House, is apparently too valuable where she is as a representative due to concerns about passing the president's agenda through the House chamber. Now, on that and other topics, we go to Mike Wagenheim, I-24 News senior U.S. correspondent. He's at the U.S. State Department in D.C. Mike, Trump says it's, I think he termed it basic politics, nothing personal with Stefanik, needing the Republican numbers in Congress. But there's an upcoming special election, I think, in this week in Florida that may weigh in. Is it all but certain at this point that Stefanik or any Republican member of Congress will not be the next UN ambassador?
It's a mere certainty. If they're going to pull Stefanik's nomination, there'd be no reason to nominate somebody else from Congress. There's actually two special elections going on right now in Florida, one to replace Michael Waltz, who was elevated to National Security Advisor, the other to replace Matt Gaetz, the doomed nominee for Attorney General. And then Republicans also worried about Stefanik's own election for her seat, should she have been elevated to the UN, because that process may be dragged out by the Democratic state administration there in New York. So certainly domestic implications dictating this one. And even within the Senate, Bill Hagerty, member of the Foreign Relations Committee, was thrown out there as a possible nominee by some analysts. But in the Senate, the margins aren't that much bigger on that side either right now. So it certainly seems that this nomination will come from outside the Capitol.
Now, on those possible others, let's call them, what do we know? Who's gotten your attention so far, caught your ear, in terms of a potential candidate? I know there are some names, being floated.
Well, there are some more traditional names being floated out there right now as a replacement for Elise Stefanik. Certainly David Friedman, the ex-ambassador to Israel. He's currently running a nonprofit promoting Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. Trusted by Trump and his circle. Certainly familiar with diplomacy at this point in time. That's one name. By the way, Friedman, I asked him about this months ago before Stefanik was even nominated. He told me if he was ever picked for the UN, first off, he'd take it if Trump offered it. He'd basically take any position that Trump would offer. But he said he would treat the UN like a bankruptcy attorney, which he is. He said, I treat it like a Chapter 11 bankruptcy. They got 1 or 2 years to straighten things out. If they don't, liquidate it. And that's how he would treat the UN. I thought that interesting. Another name being floated out there, Eli Coheney, the ex-deputy.
Yes, go ahead, Mike.
Certainly so. Eli Coheney, the former deputy special envoy for combating and monitoring anti-Semitism here in the State Department. She's a former television executive, has gone on as a surrogate for Trump on various TV networks. Her name being bandied about as well right now. And Rick Grinnell, the ex-ambassador to Germany, also was the acting director of national intelligence. He brokered some economic normalization agreements between Serbia and Kosovo. Right now, he's already working for the Trump admin as the special envoy for special missions. He's gone on record as saying he doesn't want the job. However, when Trump comes calling, people generally answer the call within his circle. So those are some of the more traditional names. Outside of that, maybe some dark horse candidates, including Laura Trump, Donald Trump's daughter-in-law, married to Eric Trump, his son. She was floated for a possible Senate position months ago before it was given off to somebody else. Now, she just signed on with Fox News for a new show that may take her out of the running. Outside of that, maybe Dorothy Shea, the current interim ambassador. She was a former American ambassador to Lebanon. Maybe the Trump administration sends a message that, hey, the UN isn't all that important anyway. We're pulling all this funding. This is another message. We're not even going to fill that role. Let Dorothy Shea continue to fill it, a career Foreign Service officer. Or maybe somebody like Elizabeth Pipko. She is, as Trump would say, straight out of central casting. She's a model, but also an effective communicator, former spokeswoman for the Republican National Committee. She was the co-founder of the Jexodus movement, which pulled Democratic votes away in the Jewish realm and shifted them over to the Republican Party. Been pretty effective in that role as well. I asked Pipko about this earlier today, whether she'd take that role if it was offered to her. She said to us, I fought for President Trump's vision since 2016. I knew before he even became president just how powerful he would be, taking on institutions like the United Nations, which desperately needs a fighter. Over the next 4 years, wherever President Trump believes I should be that fighter for our country, I proudly will be. She told us she won't actively pursue the role, but of course would answer the call if President Trump puts it out to her.
Jexodus. Just had to repeat that one's a good one to be put out here on the show. Mike, thanks for the updates coming to us from the State Department. A serious role to be filled there as U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. Thanks. According to a report in Axios, U.S. President Trump, staying with us in the show here, has decided to go to Saudi Arabia for his first trip abroad in mid-May. Now, Riyadh has emerged as a diplomatic powerhouse in recent months, and there are a lot of issues reportedly on the table between the two countries, clearly. So I-24 News senior correspondent Bianca Zanini has the report.
U.S. President Donald Trump is planning to go to Saudi Arabia for his first trip abroad since returning to the White House. The trip is reportedly planned for mid-May. Trump also chose Saudi Arabia for his first foreign trip during his previous term. Earlier this month, he said he was going to seal a $1 trillion agreement with Riyadh.
I'm going to Saudi Arabia. Mr. President, I've made a deal with Saudi Arabia where, because normally you'd go to UK first, and last time I went to Saudi Arabia, they put up $450 billion. You know that, right? So I said, I'll go if you pay $1 trillion, $1 trillion to American companies, meaning the purchase over a 4-year period of $1 trillion. And they've agreed to do that. So I'm going to be going there, and I have a great relationship with them.
The decision to go to Saudi Arabia first is a strong signal of Trump's increasingly close relationship with the Gulf countries. Apart from growing economic ties, the wars in Gaza and Ukraine will likely also be on the agenda. Washington is pushing a ceasefire in Gaza, but has reportedly put talks of normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia on hold for now. Meanwhile, Riyadh is part of U.S. attempts to mediate a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, and has been touted as a possible host for a first meeting between Trump and Russia's Vladimir Putin. It is still unclear if Trump will also be visiting other countries in the region during that first trip.
And one last time for me to squeeze some information out of Jakob Lappin and Belita Sladin in the studio with me here. Jakob, really astounding to look at the Saudis for a minute. We're talking about Russia, Ukraine, China, U.S., Iran, Syria, Lebanon, Israel. The Saudis have emerged as a real diplomatic powerhouse in just this last year. World heavyweights in this category at this point, can we say?
Yeah, look, I think, Saudi Arabia has long been the crown jewel of the Middle East in terms of the leader of the moderate coalition of countries whose interests are basically aligned well with those of the West, more or less, and those of Israel. And so it makes good sense for the United States to tighten those relations. Look, Saudi's enemies are the enemies of Israel and the United States. They are interested in economic prosperity. They're interested in security, quiet. These are things that most people can sign up with. So at the end of the day, I think that this is a positive development for the region to bolster Saudi's role as a leading Sunni Arab country. And, they bring with them the UAE together. They usually operate in tandem. And this instead of Qatar, and certainly instead of Iran, I think there's no real debate here. We would rather see the Saudi influence over the influence of those countries.
And the Saudis seem to be eager to have that relationship to enhance that. They were really pariah during the Biden administration. Right. They're eager to have the U.S. back in their corner, and even more than that, entrenched with, I hear reports about a defense pact. They're looking for something major from the U.S.
They are, and they have been looking for that defense pact for a while because they are worried about Iran. They continue to be worried about Iran, there was a period in time a few years ago when there were satellite images of Saudi missiles that were pointed at Tehran. So we need to know that the Saudis consider the Iranians as an existential threat, and they do not want to face that threat on their own.
But there's a lot of people, I think, watching this, and myself included, questioning when President Trump may come to Israel. Is there an Israel leg attached to this trip through Saudi Arabia? What do we know?
Well, Israeli officials are saying that the White House did not discuss with them any possible visit to Israel during this coming trip to Saudi Arabia. Definitely, that's something that could be happening. Trump would want to make his trip from Riyadh to Tel Aviv in order to show that this is the first step for normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And by the way, looking at it, it's not the way that we see that the U.S. is trying to help Israel. The U.S. is trying to help the U.S. after all, because there is the economical benefit out of this agreement with the Saudis, but also with the defense pact that lets the Americans decrease the number of troops in the Middle East, something that they really want to do, and focus, after all, on the Far East, on China and all of that. That's their ultimate goal, after all. And this defense pact, the normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, is a win-win-win-win for everybody. Not for the Iranians, of course, and their friends in the Middle East, but that's their ultimate goal, of course. It depends whether Trump is really willing to continue pushing Israel to finish this war with victory in Gaza in order to ensure that stability is the main game here in the region. Then there could be some normalization with the Saudis. If not, Hamas can always attack and sabotage any attempt of normalization. That's why this administration understands this issue specifically.
Yeah, just a short time we have left.
Yeah, just quickly, it would be interesting to note that if this defense pact does come into fruition, would it include American guarantees, security guarantees? What would happen if Saudi comes under attack from Iran, which is a very realistic scenario, or one of Iran's proxies? What does this defense pact require of the United States? That will be interesting to look out for.
And we will certainly look out for it. Yaakov Lapin and Balis Sadin, thanks for being with us the entire hour here. Thank you, gentlemen. A lot of topics covered here. And thank you to our viewers, wherever you may be in the world. We appreciate you right here with us. We hope we've answered some of your burning questions about Israel, the wider Middle East, and the events of the day in and around us here. But for now, I'm David Matlin, coming to you from Tel Aviv, live on I-24 News and The Rundown. Thanks for joining.
Dance, music, and magic immerse you in the story of Jerusalem. This is Jerusalem, an unforgettable musical where the past and present meet. Welcome to the heart of the most sought-after city in the world. A unique experience only at Kikar HaMusika. Reserve now at thisisjerusalem.co.il.
Introducing the brand new I-24 News Video On Demand app. You'll have instant access to all our programs, reports, in-depth discussions, and expert commentary, all at your fingertips, whenever you want it. So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News Video On Demand app today. The 7th of October set in motion a chain of events. Today, Israel's enemies are severely weakened, but not defeated, and the balance of power is shifting. This region never rests. And for its own survival, Israel needs to keep its finger on the pulse. If you want to better understand, if you want to hear voices you won't hear elsewhere, then tune in daily to Middle East Now on I-24 News. Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are? Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website. On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it. So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
Hello and welcome to Jewish World Weekly on I-24 News. I'm Emily Francis. Every week we focus on stories, issues, and personalities of Jewish interest here in Israel and in the diaspora, the global Jewish community. And we start with our top 5 items in the Jewish world, presented by Sarah Rogers. Hi, Sarah.
Thanks, Emily. Here are the top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. Argentinian President Javier Milei has announced the declassification of documents pertaining to how war criminals were able to flee to South America. The files are set to shed some light on the so-called rat lines, which allowed Nazis such as Joseph Mengele and Adolf Eichmann to leave Germany via Central Europe and Central America towards the end of World War II. Most of these war criminals evaded justice for years, apart from Eichmann, who was abducted by Mossad and taken to Israel, where he was tried and executed. Construction has begun on the site of a historic Jewish cemetery in Poland, despite heavy protests and a lengthy legal battle. The Polish court ruled that the site in Nowa Słupia in southern Poland was not protected as a heritage site as it could not be fully verified, with workers claiming to dig 31 inches deep and not finding anything. This is contrary to records and satellite imagery from the 1940s, proving that it was in fact the site of the cemetery. Almost a quarter of Americans who were raised Jewish no longer identify with their religion, according to a survey done by Pew Research. According to the poll, 17% describe themselves as religiously unaffiliated, 2% now see themselves as Christian, 1% as Muslim, and 4% identify with a different religion. In total, 76% of Americans raised Jewish still identify with Judaism, similar to 77% of Muslim Americans and 73% of Christian Americans. Disney reportedly had to hire more security for Gal Gadot after she received death threats following a conflict with her Snow White co-star Rachel Zegler. After the trailer for Snow White dropped, Zegler, who plays the main character, tweeted "Free Palestine," an indirect attack at her Israeli co-star. According to Variety, Snow White producer Mark Platt, who is Jewish, flew across the country to ask Zegler to delete her post, which she refused. And finally, 5 men in Indianapolis have been arrested after filming a music video in a 100-year-old synagogue. The incident took place at the conservative and restructurist Bet El Tzedek synagogue, with the 5 men entering the building to film what they described as a rap music video. Police were called to the scene after eyewitnesses saw them breaking and entering, with 4 apprehended at the location and 1 arrested after a police chase. Those are your top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. Back to you, Emily.
As the U.S. is intensifying its crackdown on anti-Israel students on college campuses, the families of October 7th victims are also joining the fight by filing a lawsuit against organizations and their leaders, alleging that they knew about the October 7th attack as it unfolded. Here's more from I-24's Lynn Plachmeyer.
Families of October 7 victims have filed a lawsuit against anti-Israel activist groups and their leaders, alleging that based on their public relations activity, they had prior knowledge of the October 7 Hamas onslaught on Israel. Some groups reportedly reactivated their social media accounts just before the attack. Others are said to have issued protest and propaganda materials when the attack unfolded in southern Israel. The families are seeking compensation and punitive damages. One of the leaders who allegedly had prior knowledge to the October 7 attacks is Mahmoud Khalil. He's affiliated with the anti-Israel group Columbia University Apartheid Divest and is a well-known organizer of many pro-Palestine protests at Columbia University. He was detained on March 8 by the federal immigration authorities in a significant escalation by the Trump administration to detain and deport student activists.
This is not a matter of simply violating university rules. This is a movement, an anti-war movement. We have sparked similar Gaza solidarity encampments across the nation and even across the globe.
This is not about free speech. This is about people that don't have a right to be in the United States to begin with. No one has a right to a student visa. No one has a right to a green card, by the way. So when you apply for a student visa, or any visa to enter the United States, we have a right to deny you for virtually any reason. But I think being a supporter of Hamas and coming into our universities and turning them upside down and being complicit in what are clearly crimes of vandalization, complicit in shutting down learning institutions. There are kids at these schools that can't go to class.
And so, as the IDF once again expands its military operation in Gaza, the crackdown on anti-Israel activists also intensifies.
Ben-Gurion University in the Negev is paving the way forward in the wake of the October 7th campaign to significantly enhance many aspects of the over 50-year institution and the Negev as a whole, fulfilling the dream of Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion. Now joining us in studio is Jeff Kay, the Vice President for Public Affairs and Resource Development at Ben-Gurion University. Hello, and thank you for being here.
Really, thanks for inviting me.
You're a busy man indeed.
Oh,
so as we've seen, throughout history, when there have been crises or wars, we're seeing a generation of people from the diaspora feeling like they want to participate. What's unique about how this has really grown exponentially since October 7th, like never seen before?
So first of all, you're absolutely correct. I would say for at least 200 years, probably more, since travel from country to country began, the Israel-diaspora relations, or the Eretz Israel Jewish community relations, have been defined in a whole lot of different ways, and one of them is giving philanthropy. We used to call it tzedakah. So this is nothing new. And if you look at the peaks of the history of the last 100 years, you will see that when there was a crisis in the Jewish world, and particularly in Israel, you see a dramatic increase in philanthropic gifts to Israel, to institutions in Israel. I think for a lot, first of all, there's a real need. People would identify a need and therefore want to give. But I think for people sitting outside of Israel, it's a way of them expressing their love and giving them something to do. And so again, you could see it just after the 67 war, you could see it after the Yom Kippur War, and a whole lot of times in our history line. And October 7th, of course, was a very dramatic moment in that time as well. I would say to you that, so Ben-Gurion University, as you mentioned before, we were hit disproportionately. The first days we had scores of students and faculty killed, thousands of people displaced, faculty, students, etc., kidnapped, hostages, and all of a sudden we had thousands of our students who were being drafted to go on Tzav Shmon emergency call-up. And we had a staff and leadership meeting on the 8th of October and said, okay, these are the things, this is the situation, and we need to provide needs for what's going on here. And actually decided not to launch an emergency campaign on that day, because we said we have to take care of business now. We have to give grants now. We have to buy new laptop computers for students. We have to find housing for displaced people. All of these needs, and it needs to be done now within hours. And if we now say we're going to go out and do this, but we're going to wait until the money is raised, then that's not doing the job, the speed we need to do. So we spent the money first and said, we said to our leadership, we'll come back in a few days, and if once our reserve is finished, depleted, we'll come back and say we need more money. And I think we got a lot of respect out of that by being not opportunistic. There was a huge demand. We met the demand and then said, okay, now we're a few days into this, let's see what we need. And we then launched a campaign for these very, very specific needs for both our community who had been affected immediately, and then the things that were about to happen in the weeks and months that followed, and raised a sum of like $12 million that helped us address the needs. And I think our donors respected us for being responsive and not opportunistic.
Right, of course. And I think, when you look at also the course of history and the Gather wars and what the needs were of the citizens at that given time, I mean, this time is so much more complicated. We're having soldiers and people talking about PTSD, things that weren't talked about in the wake of the other wars. People used to giving, you have, Israel, the bonds and the IDF and whatnot, but there are real needs of the people here on the ground. So I feel like, tell me if you agree, that people in the diaspora feeling so connected to where we're going through, there is a move also in a way that's actually going to help.
No, absolutely. But you have to differentiate between, you have to understand that there's sensitivity and people want to do the right thing. And if you're there with the right need at the right time, they will respond. And if you're there, let's just say cynically, then people will give. But they'll remember afterwards. One of the anecdotes I remember is that after the Carmel Forest fire, there was a branch of the Scouts in Eilat that was raising money to help the victims of the fire. Now, maybe that's an extreme example, and I feel nothing against the Scouts, but you cannot be in a situation. You have to be able to identify a real need and what the impact is going to be of an emergency situation. And the other thing that people have to understand, or organizations have to understand, is if you can't spend that money at the speed at which you're raising it, then it wasn't an emergency.
Right.
And I remember, as a lot of people will remember, after 9/11, the Red Cross raised millions of hundreds of millions of dollars, and about a year later a lot of that money was still there, and when asked they said, well, we're keeping it for future disasters. We cannot be in that situation, and no Israeli institution, university otherwise should be in that situation. If you say it's an emergency, it means you're going to need, you're able to spend the money now. That creates the trust that people are going to be with you when it's not an emergency as well.
Lastly, really quickly, because we're out of time, talk about, I know there are very big plans, I'm sure we'll hear more about it, but we know this is Ben-Gurion's vision. So is there going to be expansion of more programs, like as far as research, R&D, science?
I'll say two things. We were founded by a mandate by David Ben-Gurion long before it was called David Ben-Gurion University. Already in the 50s, he said there's got to be a university. In order to be able to develop the Negev, you need scientists there to learn how to use the sun for energy and grow things, and all of the things that people know about. There is a real danger at the moment that with instability in the Negev, there's a danger of depopulation, of the stronger population saying we're not going to stay there, we're going to move away. So Ben-Gurion University is doubling down on the mission that it had already, which is to reach out to the population in the Negev, whether it's the cities or the kibbutzim, and say, we're here for you, we can help in any way that you are able to identify as important to you. But our long-term plan is we received a plot of land called our North Campus. We're building a northern campus of our university in Beersheba, which will double the footprint of the university, and that will take care of an increasing number of students coming, but also the ITF intelligence and communication users who are moving down, and the idea is to give them a university degree at the same time as they're serving the country.
Wow. Jeff Kay, thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you again as more great plans develop.
Thank you very much.
Various countries in Europe and elsewhere have emerged since October 7th to champion Palestinian statehood, despite the dominant jihadist elements. And one such place is Norway, where the government has stood out for its clear side in this war. I-24 News correspondent Adi Cohen from our sister Hebrew channel went there and filed this report.
18 months of prolonged and bloody war in the Middle East have managed, it seems, to make its way all the way to the remote regions of Scandinavia. Ripples, some would say, which verge on a tsunami.
To resist the injustices done by our government in our name.
Since the October 7 massacre, and despite its echoing horrors, Norway has become one of the countries in Europe most hostile to Israel.
Norway was among the very first Western countries to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. We have condemned the violations of international humanitarian law.
Anerkjennelse av Palestina en støtte til moderate krefter som på vikende front I en langvarig og grusom konflikt.
In the past year and a half, this hostility has been expressed to Norway's harsh condemnations of Israel, with Oslo even going so far as to file a lawsuit against Israel in The Hague. Then there is also Norway's campaign to defend and support UNRWA, as well as its recognition of a Palestinian state, and not forgetting the Norwegian government's ban on the kingdom, sending its condolences for the massacre, or recognizing Hamas as a declared terrorist organization. A hostile sentiment which is also expressed out on the streets, almost in every corner.
But the government
that bears the largest responsibility. But the government sees that anti-Israel moves and rhetoric is popular also with the large chunk of the population. Only a few days after the massacre, there was a change of Minister of Foreign Affairs in Norway. He, Espen Barth Eide, he has single-handedly, together with the Prime Minister, changed the Norwegian policy towards Israel.
We need to establish a Palestinian government, a Palestinian state, and the Palestinian state has to be recognized.
The party decided to adopt the full economic boycott of Israel, and they are now working to make it the policy of the party itself.
Almost every week, the streets of the capital, Oslo, are flooded with mass demonstrations. But even away from them, the locals advise me when I visit to avoid Israeli symbols or even not to speak Hebrew.
You could have some unpleasant experiences, unfortunately, especially from young Muslim men, but also from ethnic Norwegian leftists.
I think in Norway we have quite a strange situation, coincidence, where especially the left side of a political sphere is very Palestinian-friendly. Palestinian cause is almost a part of the left-wing politics in Norway. I became aware of it after October 7 that people are basically blind. It doesn't matter what Israel does, what Israel says, they will always be against Israel.
And as in too many destinations where the anti-Israel climate triumphs over public consciousness without any real counter-reactions, anti-Semitism raises its head.
We've got people that's been beaten up. We had people who had to go in hiding in a way as well. People had things written on the door. Luckily, I live just out of Oslo.
For being Jews or being Israeli supporters?
Both. Last year, and he was a Christian Norwegian guy, got beaten up actually.
Why?
Because he had an Israeli flag. I grew up in a beautiful country. Norway is actually quite beautiful. I never had problems being a Jew in Norway. Never felt any anti-Semitism at all when I grew up. My upbringing was different from what my kids has felt. Knew the last 20 years it started to become tougher to live in Norway.
For some, it probably has roots in anti-Semitism, but I'm not eager to put that label on it. 33% of the Norwegian public says that their conception about Israel affects what they think about Jews in general.
Our few supporters in Norway attribute the hostile discourse against Israel mainly to the rampant disinformation fueled by the local media, schools, and well-funded pro-Palestinian organizations.
There was a survey done last year where 50% of the Norwegians said Israel treats the Palestinians as badly as Jews were treated during the Second World War.
Wow.
50%. There are very widespread misconceptions in the Norwegian public about Israel's situation. More than 20% says that as long as the state of Israel exists, there cannot be peace in the world. It's a result of not only bias in the media, but also in the textbooks in school, where they learn the story only almost according to the Palestinian narrative, and you don't get the Israeli story.
For the past 2 decades, Conrad has been running MIF, a non-religious pro-Israel organization, which has supported a distant Jewish state since the 70s. In the past year and a half, the reality has become particularly charged and tense.
We have had several instances when meetings and events have been disturbed by anti-Israel activists. That feels threatening. We have had to pay tens of thousands of euros in having security companies help us during events and meetings. The Norwegian government has not spoken out against this mob that is threatening and intimidating. There has been a few violent incidents against friends of Israel, and I'm also concerned that this has not been condemned strongly.
I get a lot of hate from it almost every day, and sometimes at work, but I always say my opinion. Even when I'm at work, I say that I support Israel. I get told that I support child murders, that I'm a Nazi, which makes no sense.
We met MIF members at a weekend of consolidation and enrichment for the organization's young people in one of the forests of Norway, far from the radar of the protesters.
So my father is a Jew, so I always knew about Israel, but I never thought that much about the political side of it before October 7th. And then when I saw a brutal massacre of people in Israel and everything what followed, I became very interested in the political side of things. And I think that Israel have a better argument. I also have a strong opinion about media reaction in Norway to the conflict.
History in Europe and in the Muslim world cries to us that there is a need for the Jewish people to be sovereign in their own land.
Thus, the work of those organizations like MIF enters a place where the state has failed for years in the propaganda war, while clearly underestimating the real threat inherent in the growing wave of hatred against Israel, which, as a consequence of this, is directed at Israelis and Jews around the world.
When it comes to, in terms of the Norwegian public, unfortunately the Norwegian public has been accidentally brainwashed by seeing just pictures and photos that, of course, they're devastating, but they see only one side of the conflict.
Very ashamed that we have paid for Hamas support. I want to say that you have people here that actually know the truth and see your suffering, and we will never stop.
We are here, and we're going to be here. And I think we're going to win the struggle in the end. But it's going to be a tough fight. But we will win the struggle both in Israel and here as well.
Last week's International Conference on Combating Anti-Semitism in Jerusalem experienced quite a bit of pushback over the inclusion of many far-right European politicians, leading many to choose to cancel their attendance. Politicians, world leaders, advocates, influencers, and entertainers converged to talk about the anti-Semitic issues facing Jews, not just in Israel, but around the world. And joining us now with one of those people that made everybody laugh last week is Ami Kozak, comedian, impressionist, musician, Jewish advocate, influencer, and I'm sure so many other things. A real-life renaissance man.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Good to meet you. You're very popular and you're very funny. Tell us about this conference and, you know, from your perspective, what was the experience like?
So for me, my role there was to bring levity and laughter. Obviously, the subject matter of combating anti-Semitism in its current form today is very heavy, and there were a lot of panels and speeches addressing serious issues. And I found my function there was to unify everybody and kind of transcend the politics and just be able to laugh. So it was broken up throughout the day into various panels and important discussions to be had. And then at the end of the day, at the nighttime program, we had some fun and artists were singing songs, and I came out and was able to.
That's a lot of pressure. I mean, you know, come out of serious depression and then, like, I mean, we know humor is the only way that the Jewish people have gotten through many tragedies, but
I got
with
lucky.
Those kind of people in the room.
Yeah, I got lucky because at one point I was approached and said, okay, so Bibi want to speak for 2 hours. So the room gonna empty out after that. I don't know when you wanna go because he gonna come and then it's over. So what do you wanna do? And I'm like, so there was an Israeli element to it of things kind of moving and ebb and flow. But luckily, I got into a time slot where I think people were ready to laugh. Yeah. And I was able to come out and bring out, do some of their favorite Israeli politicians and American politicians.
So, like, let's hear it.
Oh, you know, your favorite president, he wasn't there, but he wished he could be there in spirit. So I brought the next best thing, your favorite president, Donald J. Trump. So good for Israel, ambassadors of truth. And the Ministry of Diaspora was there. I even said, you know, diaspora is a word I hadn't heard before, Emily. It's actually Melania's sister's name, Diaspora. She's a great, beautiful person, Diaspora. We love that. And we had a great time, and I brought out a little bit of Bibi, did a little Bibi for the folks, a little bit of President Herzog, so that was a lot of fun.
People have a sense of humor about the Bibi impressions?
Well, after he went, it sort of warmed them up. They started with Bibi, and they ended with Bibi. It was like bookends. It was a beautiful thing. And all the words that Bibi uses are beautiful words, you know. They say Trump has the best words, but actually, Bibi, you know, we will defend Israel tirelessly, vigorously, relentlessly, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
And that's kind of the opposite energy of Herzog, which I met the night before at his event, and it was more like, he has kind of one emotion, so he's very steady. So when he gets up, it's just like, I am totally outraged by anti-Semitism. Really, truly, can't you tell? I am outraged, really, truly, really. And I kind of feel like he just took an Ambien, he's very, very calm, very, very calm. Really, truly, I just stubbed my toe. It's okay. Iran and its proxies will try to destroy us, but first I will take a nap, and then we'll deal with it. So it was fun. We had a good time.
It's amazing how you can go back and forth between people in one sentence almost.
Yeah.
How do you split your brain like that?
It's like my little X-Men superpower ever since I was a kid. And my parents were saying, Ami, go on the table and do so-and-so. I grew up with sort of that borscht belt.
Also, you had that pressure of parents making you, as a kid, entertain the friends?
Yeah, I'm a youngest child, so it's just sort of, and I'm short, so that's how you stand out. You got to be hilarious. And if you're the youngest in the family, and at a very young age, my parents were professionals, but they loved that I could imitate all their friends and stuff. So I was standing on the coffee table just imitating my dad's friends in the Catskills in the summer. So we came from that spirit of admiring comedy.
Yeah. Well, and it also sounds like you enjoyed it. It wasn't like your parents were like, look at my son and perform and make people laugh.
All of a sudden being able to turn into other people creates this huge reaction, and I've used that power ever since to my benefit. So.
And has anyone used it on you, impersonating you?
My children try to do it, where they're like, they imitate my tired dad bod walking around the house. So I have it coming, when you have little kids at home. I have it coming. They find me funny for now, but it's going to run out at a certain point.
Well, at least they find you funny for now. My kids don't care that I'm on TV. I'm like, don't you think it's cool your mom's on TV?
It's fun when your kids start to imitate you and you feel like, oh my God, I'm really raging too much. And that's what they do.
Ami, thank you so much. It's good to see you, and come back next time you're here.
Looking forward. Always love being here. Thank you.
So that's all for this week's episode of Jewish World Weekly. Thank you so much for watching. You can head over to the I-24 News YouTube channel to catch up on this episode as well as previous episodes. I'm Emily Francis. Thank you so much, as always, for watching Jewish World Weekly, and shalom.